My name is Gregory, and this happened last December when I was home alone in my house for a whole week. My girlfriend had gone to stay with her parents for the holidays, and I stayed behind because of work. I live in a quiet neighborhood in a small town in upstate New York. The houses are pretty spaced out, and most of the people on my block go away for Christmas, so I basically had the whole street to myself. At first, I liked the idea of the peace and quiet. I thought I would get a lot of rest and maybe catch up on some shows and just enjoy the coziness of the holidays for a bit. But what happened that week still lives rent-free in my head. It was on my second night alone. It was around 6:30 and already completely dark outside. It had been snowing lightly all day, and there was a white layer on my yard and driveway. I was in the kitchen making a simple dinner, just pasta and chicken. Usually my girlfriend is the one to cook our meals. I'm not much of a chef. I turned on the TV in the background to make the house feel less empty, because as happy as I was to have the place to myself for a bit, I wasn't used to it being so empty and quiet in here. While I was eating at the table, I heard something unusual. It really took me a second to figure out what it was. It sounded like singing. I muted the TV and listened. The sound was definitely coming from outside. The singing got a little clearer, and I realized the person was singing Jingle Bells. At first I thought maybe some neighborhood kids were playing around outside, but the voice didn't sound like a kid. It sounded like a grown man. I got up and walked toward the front door because that seemed like the direction it was coming from. The closer I got, the louder it got. By the time I reached the door, it sounded like the singing was coming from right on my front stoop. I felt a weird feeling in my stomach, but at that moment I still thought maybe it was just a caroler. I opened the door, and standing in the glow of my porch light was a man around 35 years old. He wore no hat and his coat looked too thin for the weather. But the strangest thing was that he was completely focused on singing Jingle Bells, staring down at my welcome mat like he wasn't even aware I opened the door. I remember forcing a little smile because I didn't really know what else to do. I'd never gotten Christmas carolers before. But even still, I never heard of a grown man doing it solo. It's supposed to be a group thing from what I know. He didn't look dangerous, he actually just looked sort of confused or maybe slow. I even wondered if he was special needs or something because he didn't react to me being there. He just kept singing. When he finished the song, I expected him to say something, or at least leave. But he just took a breath and started singing Jingle Bells all over again from the beginning in the same slow off-key tone. But now, he was looking up at me, making direct eye contact. I felt my smile drop because it was just weird now. I stood there another minute, pretending to listen even though it felt uncomfortable. I kept thinking he would stop after the second run, but he didn't. He just looped the song. I checked my phone and realized almost 4 minutes had passed while he sang Jingle Bells over and over. Finally, I decided it was enough. I told him thank you in a polite tone, and I slowly closed the door. I thought that would send him on his way, but once the door was closed, I still heard the singing. It continued without even slowing down. I walked back to the table and sat down trying to ignore it, but the longer it went on, the harder it was to ignore. The man didn't seem normal, and it bothered me that he was still right outside my door singing the same song. I wondered if maybe he was special needs and someone was out there with him, like by the street or something, but I didn't see anyone else out there. It made the whole house feel uncomfortable, like someone weird was standing too close to my personal space. I kept eating, but I couldn't focus on the food. It went on for my entire dinner. Finally, after about 10 minutes straight, the singing stopped. The sudden silence actually made me jump because I had gotten used to the singing. I got up slowly and walked back to the front door window. When I looked outside, I expected to see the man gone, but he was still there. He had moved. Now he was standing at the end of my driveway. He was just facing my house, completely still. He was no longer singing, at least I couldn't hear anything from here. He was just standing there in the snow, staring at the door. Something about that felt worse than the singing. He looked like he was waiting. I opened the door a crack and told him he couldn't be here, that this was private property and he needed to leave. He didn't move at all. The whole thing was so unnatural. I finally told him that if he didn't leave, I would call the police. Then I shut the door again. I watched him for another minute from the window, but he didn't budge. I didn't want to actually call the cops because I thought maybe there was something mentally wrong with him and I didn't want to make things worse. So instead, I decided to just go upstairs, lock my bedroom door, and try to relax. I checked out the window upstairs before changing into bedclothes. The man was gone from the driveway. Thank God. I figured the threat worked. I got into bed, turned on a lamp, and started reading my book to wind down. Maybe 20 minutes went by when I heard something from behind the house. I knew instantly what it was, unfortunately. It was the same man singing Jingle Bells again, except now it was coming from my backyard. I jumped out of bed and went to the back window. When I looked down, not only was he directly inside of my backyard, he was already looking up at my window. The man was in my backyard standing in the snow directly below my bedroom window. He was looking straight up at me while he sang. I slid open the window and yelled at him that I was calling the police. The singing stopped instantly. He stood there in total silence for about 3 seconds. Then, he suddenly burst into a full sprint toward the back door on the lower level. The second he was out of my view, I heard the most insane sound I've ever heard in my life. He started screaming at the top of his lungs, not like a normal scream. It sounded like a death metal singer, but even more insane and deranged. It echoed across the yard and through the entire house. Then came the banging. The back door shook violently as he kicked it, slammed into it, and probably tried ripping the doorknob off. I felt the vibrations from the impacts in my upstairs bedroom. I realized this guy wasn't just weird. He was trying to get inside. I grabbed my phone and called 911 right away. I begged them to hurry, telling them a man was trying to break in. I stayed on the line while holding a baseball bat with my other hand. I backed into my bedroom closet and shut myself in. The operator told me to stay hidden. I could still hear the screams and bangs from downstairs, and every second felt like he was going to break through. Then, just as suddenly as they started, the bangs stopped. Everything went silent except for my breathing. I didn't know if he left or if he got inside. I stayed completely still in the closet until the police arrived. They checked the entire outside of the house and confirmed the back door was still locked. The operator said I could come out and meet them. When I stepped outside to greet them, I finally felt like I could breathe again. We walked around the backyard and saw deep footprints in the snow, showing exactly where he had stood while singing to me through the window and where he had run up to the back door. The footprints then led off into the woods behind my property. The cops went to follow the trail a little bit, but came back because it apparently wasn't worth going deep into the woods at night. They acted like it wasn't a big deal. They told me people act strange all the time and that as long as I kept my doors locked, I should be fine. They didn't seem very interested in finding him, and that bothered me a lot, but I was too shaken up to argue. After they left, the house felt horribly empty and cold. I kept every door and window locked and double-checked them over and over. At that point, I was over the alone time and just wanted my girlfriend back home. I went down to my parents' place for Christmas Eve and Christmas, thankfully. As far as that man, he never returned. At least, not that I know of. This story is about my Christmas experience from about 10 years ago. I was 6 years old, since my birthday was in November, and I had just finished celebrating. Now we were getting ready for the holiday. My birthday celebration happened on the same day as the famous Odell Beckham Jr. catch. I lived with Cowboys fans, but I was a Giants fan. I remember it being talked about for the rest of the night, and even during my birthday celebration. It was an eventful birthday week, and I'm surprised I remember all of this since I was only 6. I didn't understand football, but I understood that the catch was crazy, so I was just living in the moment and happy it was my birthday, like any other kid. For my birthday, I got tickets to the Mavs-Wizards NBA game on December 30th. I was a Cavaliers fan, but since we lived in DFU outside of Dallas, I knew a lot of Mavs fans, and I was a small fan myself, so I was grateful. It was going to be my first NBA game. Christmas Day was 5 days before, and I got a brand new Odell Beckham Jr. jersey and a Mavericks shirt and sweatshirt as I was becoming a sports fan. I had a great Christmas, but one of my Christmas gifts was another Mavs game, which was on December 27th against the Oklahoma City Thunder. I was so excited to go to both games. The day came and we went to the game. The Mavs won a close one, something like 112 to 105. It was crazy to see an event like that in an NBA arena for the first time. We left the game and drove home, which was maybe 45 minutes away from the American Airlines Center. The next couple of days were normal, but I was excited to go back to that amazing stadium and atmosphere. This time we went again. I didn't know it would be the last time I went for years. At the last game, we had nice seats, like 7 rows from the court and in the middle, but this time we were maybe row 20 and in a corner area, so the experience was different. The game was going well, and I was enjoying it. The Mavs were killing them by like 20 to 30 points at halftime. Since I was a child, I wanted to roam around and get food and go to the bathroom by myself, but I was with my parents and only 6 years old, so my parents and I walked to get some food. We waited in line for maybe 20 minutes. My dad went to another restaurant inside the arena to get different food, and I stayed with my brother, who was waiting in line to pay. As we talked to the worker, I walked away to throw out some of the candy they bought me before the game. I walked to a trash can maybe 30 feet away. As I got there, this tall white man came up to me and asked, "Hey, are you lost?" I shook my head and didn't say anything. He said he didn't see my parents around and told me, "Let's go look," as he grabbed my hand and walked with me. I was just a kid, so I walked with him. He took me toward the nosebleeds and said we were going to the intercom so they could announce my name and find my parents. I said okay and kept walking. We got to the top and we waited for about 10 minutes. He waited until the coast was clear and then tried pushing me towards the emergency stairs or elevator. I don't remember exactly, but I do remember there was no one around. Then I remembered stranger danger, and the guilt and fear started sinking in. I realized I shouldn't go with this man. He didn't have any credentials. When he let go of my hand to go check his phone, I ran all the way back to the stands. As I ran, I saw him standing there with a small grin on his face. I couldn't find my parents, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be somewhere safe. I found my brother, who hadn't told my parents he lost me because he didn't want to get in trouble. He asked if I was okay, and I said yes, choosing not to say anything. The game ended and the Mavs won, but I didn't care. I just wanted to go home. As we exited, I was quiet. When we got in the car, I was also quiet. My parents seemed confused that I didn't seem energetic, but I told them I was tired. As we drove home, I almost fell asleep, but then a loud honk screeched behind us. It was so loud I almost screamed. I turned around, and there he was, the same man driving a truck with maybe 3 other men inside. I couldn't tell who they were, just silhouettes. My parents yelled at them from our car when they pulled up next to us, but the men just stared. I wanted to say something so badly, but for some reason I didn't. When we got home, I went right to sleep and passed out fast. In the middle of the night, I woke up with chills. I noticed a light flashing at my window. I looked out, expecting something innocent, Santa Claus or something, but instead saw that man standing out there, shining a flashlight into my bedroom window. I screamed and ran to my parents' room, telling them someone was at my window as if it were a first-story window. They rushed outside and searched for maybe 20 minutes. They didn't find anything, and since I was a kid, they didn't believe me. They said it must have been a shadow from a car, but I know what I saw. On New Year's Eve, a couple days later, we were staying up until midnight to watch the ball drop. We were about 5 or 6 minutes away from midnight when the doorbell rang. My parents answered it. I didn't pay attention until I heard the man's voice, and I was 100% sure it was him. I told my parents, but they didn't believe me. I told them at the game he brought me to the high level, and I ran away and escaped, but they still didn't believe me. They said it was just a man handing out lost dog flyers for his cousin's dog. The night went on, and I was fine, but then a year later, on New Year's Eve, there was a knock at my bedroom window. Keep in mind, I had forgotten about the situation. I got up and looked, and there was a piece of paper on the window that said, "This New Year, you'll meet me again." I gave my parents the note, and they filed a report, but they never heard anything back. Every couple of years, I get terrified of New Year's Eve, thinking that man will come back. I told my parents I never want to go back to an NBA game, saying it wasn't my thing. But now I'm 16, and it scares me that the man knows where I live. I'm considering going to the Cavs vs. Mavs game on January 2nd or 3rd, which would be my first game since then, but I'm not sure. This experience scared me away from basketball and made me always close my curtains. I remember this night way too clearly, and even now I think about how close my family came to something really terrible. It was early December, and we decided to drive up north into the mountains to cut down a real Christmas tree. It was something my wife Marianne and I always wanted to do, and our 7-year-old son Andrew was excited about it too. The weather was cold and cloudy, and the sky had that heavy look where it feels like snow is always about to fall again. To us, that added to the Christmas vibe. The whole ride up the winding roads made me feel like a kid again. It was a while since I'd done something this unique and in the Christmas spirit, and having Andrew so excited about it just brought me back to my youth. When we finally reached the remote area Marianne found online, there were no other cars around in the parking area. There were a bunch of light posts scattered around, so we weren't in pitch black darkness if you were wondering. That's why we picked the place. Still, we did bring flashlights. We parked by a small, unmarked path that led deeper into the trees. There was a lot of snow on the ground still from the snowfall we got a few days earlier, and up this high, the snow took even longer to melt. Andrew jumped out of the car right away and started throwing snowballs at us, so I started throwing them back. We were here to have fun, so of course I was going to try to make it as memorable as possible for Andrew. I grabbed our flashlights and the axe that I planned to use to chop down a tree. We walked up the narrow path with snow crunching under our boots. Andrew kept running ahead, stopping to point at trees he thought might be perfect. The deeper we went, the more the road behind us disappeared, and the only light came from the faint moon glowing behind the thick clouds. It was so quiet that I even asked Marianne and Andrew to stop for a second, just to really take it in. There was not a single sound, maybe a light breeze, that was it. To be honest, if I had been there alone, I'd have been slightly creeped out just off the silence and darkness alone. As we walked deeper onto the trail, we had to utilize the flashlights we brought, all three of us. Andrew was having a lot of fun with the flashlight until the light from the parking lot was no longer visible, and it was now basically total darkness outside of the flashlights. He started to get a little nervous evidently because he asked how far we were going to go, and he made a comment on the darkness. I kept feeling like someone was watching us or like something was walking behind us, but every time I turned around, there was nothing but the empty snowpath. About 10 minutes in, we finally found a spot where the trees were tall and full. Andrew ran around them in circles looking for the best one. Marianne stayed closer to me and whispered that she wanted to pick a tree fast because she had a weird feeling too. I got exactly what she meant. This was a lot creepier than I had imagined. Right then, I heard soft crunching behind us. It wasn't any of us, nor was it an animal. It sounded like boots crunching the snow, but very slowly, sneaking-like. When I turned around, I saw a man in dark clothes, standing about 20 feet back on the path. He wasn't dressed for the weather. His hands were bare and red from the cold. His jacket looked more like a windbreaker. His face looked pale and stiff, like he'd been out in the cold for way too long. Marianne grabbed Andrew's arm to pull him closer. When the man noticed we were looking at him, he suddenly smiled in an off-putting way and stepped closer. He asked if we were looking for a Christmas tree. His voice breaking the already unsettling silence was uncomfortable. His voice was deep and kind of soft. Before I could say anything, Andrew answered yes, excited again, and I felt a jolt of panic because I didn't want this man knowing anything about us. Marianne quickly told him no, that we were just walking. The man stepped closer again, and the way he moved made every hair on my arm stand up. He told us not to worry because he wasn't a park ranger. He said it like he could tell exactly why we lied, because admittedly, what we were doing was super illegal. I didn't want to talk to him at all. Something was wrong with him. He looked hungry or desperate or like he hadn't slept in days. I guess, for lack of a better word, he looked homeless. I told Marianne we should head back to the car, and she nodded, gripping Andrew's jacket. When we started walking past the man, he stood by, smiling and watching, giving slight nods as if to say goodbye as we walked. Andrew kept turning around, asking if the man was following, and we told him to stay facing forward. Every time I looked back, the man was a little bit closer than before, even though I didn't hear him speed up. I whispered to Marianne that when we reached the main road, we had to run to the car. She held Andrew's hand tighter and nodded without looking back. The man's steps stayed behind us the whole time, dragging a little like his boots were too big or too heavy. Once we got close enough to see the gap in the trees where the car was parked, I told them to go. Marianne lifted Andrew and ran as fast as she could. The only reason I felt even remotely safe was because of the axe in my hand, but I'm not a violent person and I've never had to resort to violence in my entire life. I turned around to block the path behind us for even just a second. The man had stopped walking and was just staring at me, and he put his hands up halfway, still smiling, and then he said, "I mean no harm. Why don't you get back to your truck now?" And I felt my heart skip a beat as he said this. He said truck, like he knew we came in a pickup truck. I replied back simply that we don't want any trouble. Then I turned and started hurrying back down to the lot. But halfway there, Marianne screamed my name, sounding panicked. Oh no, I thought. When I got to the truck, she showed me that both right side tires were punctured. I didn't have time to examine it for long to realize it was him. I told Marianne to call 911 immediately, but she struggled to find service at first. She walked around the snowy lot for a bit until there was reception. She never strayed too far away. I had Andrew wait in the truck, who was now clearly concerned as he watched Marianne and I freaking out. He was old enough to know something bad was happening. Marianne seemed to be having a hard time on the phone, so I took it and explained our location and that we felt threatened by a random man in the woods who may have potentially been responsible for the tires. Given the potentially unstable individual in the vicinity, and the fact that we had a child with us, police were taking this very seriously and told me to keep my family locked in the truck until police arrive and that a tow truck will be sent as well. I was instructed to keep the operator on the line while we waited, but eventually the line started getting choppy, cutting out at moments because of the poor reception. Then, Marianne suddenly screamed in my ear to look and pointed towards the tree line by the path we were on. There were multiple people standing just beyond the tree line. I counted at least 3. They looked like shadows from where we were, which made the sight even more terrifying. It was like we were being stalked and hunted. Then 2 of the people started walking closer. I told the operator, and she said something that really made me uncomfortable. She asked if I had any kinds of weapons, and when I said I had the axe, she implied that if it came down to it, to use it to defend my family. By this point, Andrew was crying, and Marianne tried to calm him down. I told the operator that 2 of the figures were still walking toward the truck. They weren't running or yelling or anything. They just walked very slowly, like they knew we weren't going anywhere. The 3rd figure strangely disappeared, likely back deeper into the woods away from the light. The operator told me the police were close, but I had no idea if that meant 2 minutes or 10. I kept looking back and forth between the tree line and the road in the distance, praying to see flashing lights. I tried to talk to the operator again, but the call dropped. The second it cut off, everything felt 100 times worse. I locked the doors again, even though they were already locked. I kept my hand on the axe, gripping it so hard my knuckles hurt. As the 2 people were now within range of hearing them speak, we could hear them saying, "We're here to help," as they waved their hands in the air. We didn't recognize either of them to be that guy from earlier. "Do you think they're park rangers?" Marianne asked, and I said firmly, "Not a chance." But perhaps I said it too loud, because Andrew just started crying even more, which Marianne had to try extra hard to console him. These 2 people approaching were dressed similarly to that first guy, aka way underdressed, and their clothes looked worn out, almost dirty, and they didn't seem bothered by the cold at all. But then, seemingly randomly, the 2 of them turned around and started running back in the direction they had come from. We didn't know why just yet, but it was soon clear. Never have we been so ecstatic to hear the sound of police sirens. It was getting louder fast, and eventually we saw the flashing lights coming from down the road. Coming pretty fast, actually. The police SUV entered the lot with its spotlight on, and it instantly shined in our direction. I flashed my lights to try to get the cop in the car to see the men running back into the woods. At this point, though, they were already nearly gone, but their footprints weren't. Once the SUV was next to us, 2 officers jumped out immediately with flashlights drawn, and I got out to basically get on my knees thanking them. I pointed in the direction the men ran. I said they disappeared into the trees like they had rehearsed where to go. The police told us to stay inside the truck while they searched, and more units showed up within minutes. 1 officer stayed with us. Andrew was no longer scared, but rather once again excited at the commotion and the sight of police officers. After a long search, the police came back and told us what I already knew they were going to say. They didn't find anyone, just tracks in the snow that went deep into the woods and eventually spread out in different directions. They didn't know if the people lived somewhere out there or if they were part of some kind of camp deeper in the mountains. They said sometimes drifters or squatters stay hidden in remote areas during the winter. The tow truck eventually arrived, and the police stayed around us the entire time until our truck was loaded up. We had to sit in the back of a patrol car to stay warm while they finished everything. No one really said much. Marianne held Andrew in her lap, and I just stared out the window, watching the dark tree lines, half expecting to see someone standing there again. On the ride back home, none of us talked. It was like all of us were afraid that saying anything out loud would make it real again. We didn't try to cut down a Christmas tree ever again. We didn't even go back to that mountain area. Even now, 10 years later, I refuse to go anywhere near it. To this day, what scares me the most is the thought that they had been watching us long before we even noticed them. They saw us arrive in that parking lot because they knew to strand us by slashing my tires, and they were waiting for us to go deep enough into the trees so we wouldn't make it back to the truck. We were lucky we trusted our instincts enough and decided to leave for the truck almost right away. We were also lucky I was holding an axe, which may have dissuaded them from doing something crazy. I don't like thinking about how close we came to potentially never going home. I still think about this one night from when I was 9 years old. It was a few days before Christmas. My parents both had things to do that night, and since I was almost 9, they felt okay leaving me home for a little bit. My mom had to run to the grocery store to get some stuff for Christmas dinner, and my dad was working late like he usually did in December. I was sitting on the couch watching a Christmas movie probably, and eating cookies by the fireplace and tree. Outside, it was already dark, even though it was still relatively early, and I remember the Christmas lights flashing on the houses across the street. It was normal, until the doorbell rang. The only reason this made me stop and look was because it was rather late and random for someone to ring the bell, and my mom always told me never to answer the door when I was alone. My parents never ring the bell, obviously, since they have keys. I got up and walked to the door anyway because I wanted to look through the peephole. When I put my eye up to it, I saw there was a man standing on the porch wearing a Santa Claus suit. It was the full thing, too. The red coat, the hat, the beard, everything. But he didn't look like a normal, friendly Santa. He wasn't holding anything besides what looked like a clipboard, and he was standing way too close to the door like he was waiting for me to unlock it. I didn't know what to say at first, so I just kind of whispered, "Who is it?" The man moved his head a little closer to the door like he was trying to see through the peephole or hear me better, and in that moment, he figured out right away that I was a kid. He did, I guess, what was his best Santa impression, as he said he was Santa and that he had gifts for me, and that I should open the door. At 9 years old, I wasn't stupid, and I didn't believe in Santa anymore. My parents taught me about strangers. I told them to go away and that I didn't need anything, and I tried to sound brave, but my voice cracked. The man went silent for a second, and then he asked me if I was home alone. As soon as he said that, I knew to walk away. I instantly felt stupid for even letting him know I was home. I didn't answer him. I stepped back from the door and walked fast to the living room because I suddenly felt too scared to stand near it. I sat on the couch and grabbed a pillow and stared at the TV like acting normal would make the fear go away. But then I heard the doorknob twist. He was testing if the door was locked. I wanted to scream for help, but nobody was home. I waited and hoped he would leave, but a moment later, I heard another sound from the back of the house. It was the back doorknob twisting. It happened so fast after the front door that I bet he ran around the house to the back. That door was even weaker than the front one, and we almost never used it. I felt frozen in place, and all I could think about was that my house only had 2 doors and this man was trying both. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the phone and dialed my mom's number. When she answered, I started talking really fast, trying not to cry. I told her someone was trying to get into the house and he was dressed like Santa. My mom got serious right away and told me she was coming home right now and that I should not open any doors no matter what. She told me to stay in the living room and keep the curtains closed. I sat on the floor behind the couch where I couldn't be seen from any windows, and I stayed completely still. I kept hearing small noises outside, like footsteps or light taps, just some forms of sounds indicating that someone was still there. Eventually, they stopped, and not long after, I heard a car pulling into our driveway, and I knew it was my mom because I recognized her squeaking brakes. I stayed where I was until I heard the front door unlock and slam open. My mom came in breathing hard and holding 2 grocery bags. She locked the door behind her and yelled out for me, and I ran to her right away. She hugged me and then told me she had just seen a man dressed as Santa walking down our street. She said she slowed her car down when she saw him, and she yelled at him out the window asking what he was doing. The man told her he was going door to door asking for donations, but she didn't believe him for a second. She said he looked nervous, and that he walked away fast when she started yelling. My mom told me she was proud of me for not opening the door and for calling her right away. She called the police and reported the man, and I'm sure police at the very least surveyed the area. We never found out if he was arrested or if he just disappeared into the neighborhood. 2 neighbors did say, though, that the man knocked on their doors asking for donations, though they said it seemed like a scam. Regardless, that doesn't change the fact that he tried to get into our house, where he knew a little boy was home alone. I still think about that night every year around Christmas when I see Santa decorations. I just remember being 9 years old and knowing that man on our porch was not Santa and that he wanted something else. I guess I was lucky the doors were locked and my mom got home when she did. What would have happened if that door was unlocked is terrifying to think about. I once booked an Airbnb by myself in an area in Arizona that I had a job interview. Since it was so far from home, I made a short trip out of it. I went with this one specific Airbnb because it was much cheaper than any hotels I could find. It was about half an hour away from where I'd be interviewing for, which was fine with me. It was off some dead-end, secluded road and had a nice view of the desert in the backyard. I brought my laptop with me to get work done at my at-the-time current job during the day, so that kept me busy most of the days I was there. I stayed for 3 days. My interview was on the second day that I was there, which was a Tuesday. I would be leaving Friday, so on Monday, the night before my interview, I was practicing interview questions for this specific company, and just generally getting some last-minute knowledge on their firm. I was doing this on my laptop in the living room of the little house, probably around 9 p.m., when there was a tap at the window. I say tap because it wasn't exactly a knock. It sounded more like it could have been someone's finger. My head, of course, swung to the left to look at the window in reaction. I didn't see anyone, but it was also pitch black outside. I was kind of scared to look out the window, but I had to be a man and just do it. And there was no one as far as the eye could see. Just darkness. Of course, maybe it could have been a bug hitting the window. We've got some pretty nasty bugs here after all. The next day, I got through my interview and thought I did pretty well. So for the rest of my little trip there, I explored different parts of the town in my car, ate at different restaurants, and sat in the backyard and relaxed in the sun. Little did I know, I was likely being watched while I was in the backyard. That night, I was inside watching Breaking Bad on Netflix when it happened again. A single tap at the window. Now it was obvious it wasn't a bug. I was even more disturbed now, but once again rushed to the window. Even though I saw no one, that didn't mean someone wasn't out there. I checked the windows by the front door, then opened the door and looked outside for a second. Since there was no one there, I went back inside and then went to the back door. I stepped outside onto the back porch and looked out to the desert behind the house. Silence and darkness. And then I heard a click. A sound someone made, like clicking their tongue at the roof of their mouth. It was off in the distance, beyond the light from the house. It was out somewhere in that cold desert. I felt as though someone could be hiding behind any number of those bushes, watching me and toying with me. I yelled out, and almost as if they did it in response, there was another click. I pinpointed the direction it came from, and looked that way. I could see someone now, standing not too far away, dressed in dark clothes, blending into the darkness of the desert. I started walking a little closer, then stopped, realizing I didn't want to get any closer to that person. I called out, "You're on private property. I'm gonna call the cops if you don't leave." And I saw the person eerily quickly walk away. I theorized it was the Airbnb owner, but obviously that was a stretch and I didn't really know what to actually think. The night following, I was in my bed on my laptop watching Breaking Bad again before going to bed. I think I watched 2 episodes, so I was doing this for about an hour and a half. I didn't hear any noises in the house, though I was definitely giving thought to that encounter from earlier while watching the show. When I finally turned off the light in the room and tried to fall asleep, within 10 seconds, there was a click sound again, muffled from the inside of the closet. I looked at the closet door, which was open just a crack. Then, a pretty natural response, I sprang off the bed, still in my PJs, and ran to the car. I sat in the driveway with the car running, and I called 911. I stared at the house as I spoke to the dispatcher, waiting to see if someone would come out, because all of my stuff was still in there. A police car arrived, and upon entering the house, we did a quick investigation of the house together. It was very small with not many places to hide. Conclusively, I still packed my stuff and left that place that night for a nearby hotel. I contacted both Airbnb and the host, and I was only able to get a partial refund for my stay. I still think it may have been the host of the Airbnb. I mean, who else would have access to the house? There were no signs of forced entry, which leads me to believe whoever it was may have had a key. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was a stranger who snuck in at an opportune time. My wife Cheryl and I have been together for 10 years, and we got married 2 years ago. We just got a house together not even a month ago, and things couldn't have started on a worse note. We moved to a small inland town of Georgia called Waycross. That's all the details I'm giving though, to avoid any more possible issues. We're on a quiet street with a big property that sits in front of a medium-sized patch of woods, which was one of the factors that really appealed to my wife and I. We plan to adopt a dog and raise kids here, so we wanted a big property for the dog and kids to play around on. We both work similar shifts. I get home around 5 and she gets home around 6 most of the time. The first 2 nights in the house went completely normal. It was the weekend, so we spent our entire days unpacking. It wasn't until Monday night, when we were both in bed, only having turned the lights out maybe 20 minutes ago, that outside from the backyard, there was the sound of this blasting music. Our nearest neighbors on either side were spaced out enough where we couldn't mistake music from their yards being in our yard. It was definitely in our backyard, and it wasn't party music or anything like that. It sounded like very old, staticky, vintage music. The windows were shut, so after my wife and I exchanged horrified glances at each other and wondered where the music could be coming from, I opened my window on my side of the bed, and it was much clearer. There was some song that sounded like it was from the 1940s or something blasting. I later found out after looking up the lyrics that the song name was Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf by Henry Hall. It has a slight eerie vibe to it for some reason, even though it was meant to be a happy song. But at the time of listening to it coming from our backyard, it was nothing but downright horrifying. We were still learning the house, but we figured there must be a backyard light switch downstairs. I ran downstairs to the back door and flicked the light switches next to the door, and one of them turned on the backyard lights. I didn't see anyone in the backyard. I opened the door, and the music was louder, obviously, but as I walked out into the grass, I realized it wasn't coming from the backyard, rather from the woods. The song played to completion as I was outside in the yard just standing there looking around. When the song ended, there was silence again. It seemed like someone must have been playing some stupid housewarming prank, but it wasn't appreciated. I went back to my wife and told her it was probably just some kids trying to scare the new ones in town for whatever reason. Hearing myself even say that, I realized how stupid and weird it sounded. Why would anyone do that? The next night, it happened again. A few minutes after we turned out the lights in the bedroom, music from outside started blasting. This time much louder, and the song playing was that song everyone's heard, Tiptoe Through the Tulips. Cheryl and I once again looked at each other, this time in genuine disgust and worry, because we had hoped it was just going to be a one-time thing, but it was happening again. I looked out the window, and this time I could see something on the grass. It wasn't a person, but there was definitely something out there. I told my wife I was going to check it out. She said we should just call the cops, and I said yeah, we will in a second. I went out there with this mindset that I need to establish I'm the man of the house, not just to my wife, but to whoever was thinking they could mess with us just for being the new people on the block. When I was in the yard, I saw the object in the grass was smaller than I had thought, but the blaring, creepy song was coming from it. I realized it was an old radio. I turned it off and looked up at the window at my wife who was watching, and I held it up, yelling that someone left it there to scare us with the music. What she did next was not something I expected in response to that. She started screaming my name to run inside. She kept screaming, "Run." I yelled, "Why?" And she screamed back, "There's people standing behind you." This statement made my heart skip a beat, and I turned around to face the woods. I saw 3 figures standing like 6 feet apart from each other, clearly facing my direction. They weren't running at me, they were just standing there. I yelled, "Oh shit," and ran back inside the house, slamming the door behind me. My wife was upstairs, hysterical, crying already. I told her I'd call the cops, and I did. They arrived thankfully not that long after. All the while, we were scared to hear knocks at one of the doors or windows. My wife and I desperately explained the situation to both of the police that arrived, and I showed them the radio on the ground. I asked them if they could take it back with them as evidence for prints, and told them I only touched the top part with the handle. They did take the radio. They also checked the front of the woods with their flashlights for a few minutes, probably just as a deterrent to the people in the woods to stop their behavior if they were still there. When the police left, honestly, we went right back to feeling vulnerable and scared, but thank Christ the people never returned. This was only a few weeks ago though. God forbid they came back, I'd try to get it on video. I've worked as a nurse in multiple hospitals and facilities. Before the current hospital I work at, I worked at a geriatric hospital 30 minutes from my house. I had experience working with older patients before, so this was nothing new to me. I had been working at this hospital for only a couple of weeks, and you'll soon understand why. This was on my second to last shift at this hospital, unbeknownst to me at the start of that night. I was working the graveyard shift, and I was running on negative hours of sleep. I was assigned to the Alzheimer's ward. The patients in this ward absolutely adored me. My presence as a young girl in her 20s among the residents of this ward who were otherwise left to themselves to float around in their minds, I'm sure saw me as a breath of fresh air, someone who could tie them to the now or to the everyday. If you're just left to yourself, you can mentally go to other places, but with someone else in your space, you're tied to that moment in time. I was dealing with a number of patients that night, but one was a little more restless than the others. Her name was Lena. This was my first night dealing with her, and she kept telling me anytime I'd enter her room about the voices she kept hearing and the man dressed in black she kept seeing in the corner of the room. The other lady in her room requested her curtain be closed before my shift started so that Lena would leave her alone. She was a sweet lady that smiled whenever I was around her, but she didn't say much and was very forgetful. Since I started my shift around 9 p.m., most of the patients were asleep by 11, but not Lena. Whenever she called me into the room, she'd be frightened of these alleged voices she was hearing, and the man in black that kept staring at her in the corner of the room. Not gonna lie, it was creeping me out a little. I believed that in her mind she was seeing and hearing these things, and I sympathized with her because I imagined them to be very scary. But still, I tried my best to calm her down and get her to go to sleep. I didn't want to turn on the TV to calm her down because I wanted to be courteous of the other patient in the room. I held Lena's hands and told her it's okay, to breathe and to relax. I reminded her that she wasn't here alone, and I was always just a call away. This seemed to do the trick. Lena relaxed for a while, and the next time I came in the room, she was asleep. Once most, if not all, of the patients are asleep, the night goes much slower. Time almost moves in reverse. An hour or two later, I was in the linen room stocking my cart when I heard something in the room. It was a relatively small, dead quiet room. I had the door closed too. That's why hearing another noise was weird. I turned, saw nothing, and resumed stocking my cart. Then I felt what I can only describe to be a hand on my shoulder. I looked at my shoulder, jumped, and screamed, but there was nothing on my shoulder. There was no one in the room. Yet, I knew I felt something large basically grab my shoulder. I went out in the hall for a second to peek my head. No other nurses in sight. Dead quiet. I had nothing else to do but resume what I was doing. I continued stocking the cart until it was full. Then I turned to face the door. And I fell to the floor and started screaming as my heart was immediately in my throat. There was a man dressed in black standing outside the door, looking through the glass, smiling. My screams were loud enough to wake the entire ward. The man disappeared out of sight through the glass window of the door. Seconds later, the door opened and one of my fellow nurses came in to help me off the floor as I was hysterical. I asked her if she saw the man dressed in black. Her response was, "What man? There's no one else here." We checked all the rooms in the ward. There wasn't anybody dressed in black in there. My screams woke Lena from whatever light sleep she must have been in, and when I came into her room, she started talking of the voices. This time the screams, which she didn't know were my screams. I asked her what this man in black looked like, if he was smiling, and she looked at me, and I noticed her eyebrows point down as her expression changed to look the most focused I'd seen her the entire day. She asked, "How did you know?" And even with my heart still racing, I felt it skip a beat as she said this. She started screaming now, screaming, "Get me out of here, he's coming." The other nurses came in and tried to calm her down. I was switched to a different ward that night with someone else, and I eventually ended up going home early because I was just so freaked out. I texted the head nurse the next day that my next shift would be my last, that the experience traumatized me and that I didn't really want to be in that building anymore. I got as friendly of a response as I could have hoped for. I've never been diagnosed with anything, nor have I ever dealt with hallucinations of any kind. I'm aware of the effects of lack of sleep, but this was next level. I don't know if my mind started playing tricks on me from what Lena was telling me all night, but the feeling of the hand on my shoulder, the image of the smiling man behind the glass door, matching the description a patient kept giving multiple times. This was one of those once-in-a-lifetime, unexplainable supernatural occurrences. At least, I hope it was once in a lifetime. I was driving home from work one night, taking my usual route home. I got out at midnight, so it was probably 12:15ish at this point. My town is pretty quiet and boring. A lot of woods everywhere, and not a lot of people or houses. I was on this road not far from my house with a cornfield on one side and a patch of woods on the other. It was midsummer and like 75 degrees, so I had my convertible top down. I was cruising down the street going like 50 when I heard a loud, blood-curdling woman's scream come from one side of the road, but I couldn't tell which one. I brought the car to a quick halt by slamming on the brakes and listening. There was a woman's cry from the left side, in the woods. She was crying for help. I got out of my car and grabbed the baton from my back seat. I walked towards the woods and called back, "Who's out there?" and the woman immediately called back, "Please help me." I began to run into the woods, swiping all the twigs and bushes out of my way. I yelled out to the woman to keep screaming so I could find her. She'd every 10 seconds or so scream help, and I'd approach in that direction, running, screaming back. But pretty soon, I started to realize no matter how far into the woods I went, the woman's yells didn't seem to get any closer or louder. If anything, they were always the same distance, even though I was booking it straight in the direction of the screams. I screamed out, "Tell me where you are," and about 5 seconds later, the woman once again screamed out, "Help." I stopped in my tracks now. I didn't like this. I started to feel like I was walking into some kind of trap. I turned around and started running back in the direction I came. I ran and ran until I could see the flashing headlights of my car on the side of the road beyond the trees. The whole way back, I still heard the woman's screams, but they were still the same distance no matter how much closer to my car I got, as if she were following me back. Was I being stalked? I got in my car and just drove out of there, completely freaked out. I called 911 to report it to the authorities in case they'd want to investigate it. I wasn't sticking around there though, I was tired. After telling a few friends and family about the strange encounter, I was ready to move on with my life. But a week later, I saw something on the news that made me sick to my stomach. The dead body of a 30-something-year-old woman was found in the woods by a man hiking with his dog. Oddly, there were no signs of foul play. The location that the body was reported to have been found was the same general area where I heard the screams. While that patch of woods is very big, I can't help but feel that would be a huge coincidence. Back before my girlfriend Jenny and I officially started dating, we would still hang out all the time. We both snowboard, and her family has a little cabin-type house in Vermont not far from Stowe Mountain Resort. This was around our maybe 10th time hanging out. She invited me to go up there for a weekend with her to go snowboarding for the first time together. It was like a 5-hour drive. As we neared her little house, we spent about half an hour on this very windy, secluded road on which we'd pass occasional driveways that would lead up into properties blocked off by walls of trees. We were way up there in the mountains. The sight of other cars by this point was something to behold. It really felt like we were alone up there. A lot of the driveways didn't even have tire marks in the snow, meaning even a lot of the houses were void of people. Jenny told me that's because a lot of the houses here were owned by people out of state, just like her situation. I was going like 30 when she yelled at me to slow down, it's coming up, so I hit the brakes, and this little opening in the trees that I otherwise would have missed came up. We drove this narrow trail in 4-wheel drive, which led to this small house covered in snow. It looked incredibly cozy. We parked, and first thing we did was turn the heat on in the little house. We unloaded our stuff inside, and since it was already getting dark that night, we just cooked some of the food we packed for dinner and watched a movie. Pursuit of Happiness, actually. So the house had just about everything: heat, electricity, except running water. Her family had jugs and jugs of water for important things like washing hands and plates and stuff, but there was no working toilet, so she told me we had to use the outhouse outside. I only had to go pee that night, so I just went out to the front deck and peed into the snow. It was also snowing out that night. We fell asleep at some point during the second movie we watched, and we woke up pretty early to our phone alarms. We wanted the freshies on the mountain. We started getting ready to drive up to the ski resort. After breakfast, I had to go out to the outhouse though. I ran out to the outhouse in my shoes, and my feet started to freeze. On my way to the outhouse though, I saw footprints in the snow. They were kind of big, but I couldn't tell if they were boot marks or animal prints. I followed the trail, and it actually wrapped around the house and then went into the woods. I called Jenny outside, and she came to look and said it was probably a black bear since they're everywhere up here. So I went, did my business, and we set off to the ski resort, where we had a good 8-hour run. Afterwards, we stopped at a diner to eat, and then went back to the house. By this point, it was pitch black outside and snowing again. We set up a fire and got the heat on full blast and started blasting some music. We started to drink, and eventually I had to break the seal and pee. But also, if I was throwing my boots on anyway, I figured I'd do all my business in the outhouse. I ran out into the snowstorm and to the outhouse once more. This time I slammed the door shut to prevent snow and cold air blowing in my face. I heard the blasting music from inside the house still, but then over that, I heard the crunching sound of footsteps in the snow, passing the outhouse. "Jenny?" I yelled. No answer. The footsteps just walked away. I brought my phone with me, so I just texted her, "Are you outside?" It didn't immediately deliver though, because my cell reception sucked up there. A few minutes passed and I was still in the outhouse. I was just about to finish when the blasting music suddenly stopped. It was just pure silence, minus the sound of snowflakes hitting the ground outside. As soon as I stepped out of the outhouse, I realized it was pitch black out here now. The lights from the house were off. I figured maybe the power went out. I used my phone's flashlight and noticed a fresh pair of footsteps in the snow leading to the house. I followed the footsteps to the front door, where they seemed to stop, then continue around the house. I banged on the door and yelled Jenny's name. Suddenly the door opened and an arm pulled me inside the house. It was Jenny. She slammed the door shut and locked it. She whispered that there was a man who tried to open the door, which she locked as soon as I went to the outhouse because she was scared being alone. When she saw the person at the door wasn't me, she cut the power and hid in a corner in the living room and watched in horror as a stranger walked past the living room window slowly, looking inside. I came to the door only a couple minutes after this happened. Jenny told me about the secret cellar in the floor that her dad kept a couple rifles and shotgun in. Navigating in the dark, I found the handle to it and lifted it open. Now using my flashlight, I climbed down the little ladder and grabbed one of the guns off the wall. We then waited on the couch in the dark, afraid to turn the lights back on, exposing ourselves to whoever was out there. The closest neighbors were not a short walk. Jenny said it wouldn't have been any of them, and odds are they weren't even in Vermont right now. Once again, the only sound was the sound of snowflakes hitting the ground outside, until the sickening sound of footsteps in the snow outside returned. I took the loaded gun and marched to the front door, opened it, and shot like 3 rounds into the air, screaming. The footstep sounds were gone. I'd imagine they ran off, and the sound of the shots echoing into the air masked the sound of the footsteps running away. We left the next morning under the recommendation of her father, who said it's best to not be there at the moment. They don't really have anything they're worried about being stolen, so we just got the hell out of there the next day. At least we got our full day of snowboarding in. That horrific night was definitely an experience, to say the least. My name is Howard. I'm 25 years old, and I live on my family's farm. I help take care of it when my parents are out of town. It's just a little family farm, not a commercial farm or anything like that. My parents want me to take it over when they're too old to take care of it anymore, as I'm the oldest of 3 and the only son. But honestly, I don't really want to. I don't see myself staying in the middle of Arkansas my whole life, and especially not after something really weird that happened only last July. My parents were on a romantic trip for a week, and so it was my 2 sisters, Crystal and Morgan, and I taking care of the property while they were gone. There's not much around here, lots of privacy and such, a little too much in my opinion. Except for this one night. It started later on in the night, as it was approaching time to go to bed. My sisters do college online. Crystal takes summer courses, and so she was in her room on her laptop doing work. Morgan and I were just hanging out watching some dumb show in the living room. All 3 of us kind of want to get out of the farm lifestyle. Me especially, since I'm oldest and in the prime of my 20s. One dreaded part of farm life is the predators, though. Not just the animals that come and eat your produce, but the people that come and steal from you. Believe it or not, it happens. It hasn't happened many times to us, but it does happen. We have a few guns in the house for this exact reason. Our 2 dogs outside suddenly started going crazy in the backyard. Something spooked them for sure. I first thing went outside to the yard to see what they were barking at. They both were looking in the direction of the crops, going crazy. I yelled at them to shut up, and they went quiet. I stepped right in front of the crops and listened. I heard a whistling from inside of the cornfield. It was undoubtedly a human's whistling. This was the first time I was experiencing a trespasser on the property with my dad not here. I had to hurry inside to get one of the guns. The dogs started barking again. I told my sisters that someone's outside in the cornfield and I had to go chase them away. They both said that was a terrible idea to go run into the cornfield in the dark, and they knocked some sense into me when I realized they were right. I also realized how downright terrifying that would be. So instead, I went out back to the dogs once more going crazy, barking in the direction of the crops. I aimed the gun into the air and fired off a shot which echoed into the night, silencing the dogs. I also was on some kind of power trip in the moment and screamed out to get off our land as loud as I could. I felt that would have done the trick and went back inside. My sisters were both laughing, which caused me to laugh too. But our little laugh amongst each other didn't last long, because the dogs started going crazy again, even crazier this time. I went back outside, ready to do the same thing again, but I felt my heart skip a beat when I saw the guy standing about 20 feet from the dogs, right in front of the cornfield. He looked at me and I screamed, "Hey," at which point he ran into the cornfield. I started running over and fired another shot into the air. I stopped by the dogs. There was no chance in hell I was going in there. I wasn't about to leave the dogs out here either. I unclamped their chains from the hooks and brought them inside the house. I told my sister someone was sneaking around in the cornfield. So what did we do? We called our dad. He told me I had to be the man of the house and protect my sisters. He recommended I fire another warning shot outside if whoever it was came back. After this, we all just gradually went to our respective rooms. My sisters each brought one of the dogs in their rooms and I brought the gun in my room, just because we were all a little spooked by this. I had the window open, and as I was laying in bed watching a movie on my laptop, I heard a whistling from outside. I hurried to the window and looked out to see someone slowly walking in the grass. Then, like he had some sixth sense, he stopped walking and turned to look at my window, still whistling. This jerk was obviously trying to mess with us and scare us. A very stupid idea when I already made it clear I had a gun. I ran to grab the gun off the bed and aimed it out the window. I shot at the grass a few feet away from him, purposely missing, of course. This cut his little horror movie act short, and he ran out of view of my window towards the front of the house. This time he didn't come back. He'd have to be a fool to come back after that. I obviously told my sisters why I shot, and I assured them he would not be coming back. We never found out who it was or why. It could have been some teen or multiple teens just trying to scare some innocent farmers for fun, or it could have been an actually dangerous person. I used to work as a night restock worker at a supermarket in a somewhat rural town. The store was called Great American. It was the biggest and best supermarket in the area. My shift would be as soon as the store would close at 10. I'd work from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. the latest, restocking the shelves and organizing everything before the next operating day. I of course had the keys to the store for the after hours. It would be a team of 2, myself and one other, either Terry, Carter, or Alfonso. Tonight I was supposed to be working with Terry. I arrived to the store and let myself into the back where all the inventory yet to be stocked was. I started my work using the pallet jack to bring a whole pallet of boxes out to the shopping floor. I started with the bread and nuts aisle, rotating the older loaves in the front and putting the newer loaves in the back. Halfway through, I realized I hadn't seen Terry yet. I walked to the back area of the store where the inventory was, where we'd leave our belongings. He wasn't back there yet. I left the back door cracked open with a door stopper for him when he would show up. So I went back to work for another half hour. And with still no sign of Terry, I once again went to the back of the store. He wasn't in there, but I noticed the back door was shut. I assumed that meant Terry was here somewhere. I went to open the back door, and saw the door stopper was outside, which I thought was weird that he kicked it outside instead of bringing it in. I called Terry's name and it echoed through the room. He didn't call back, so I decided to call him. He picked up, sounding like he was in bed, and I asked him if he was at work. He said he wasn't coming in tonight because he was sick. Suddenly I got the chills. I told him someone kicked the door stopper off the door, and he said it could have just come undone itself. Nobody else was scheduled to work that night. I told him feel better, and we hung up. I wasn't sure if I was convinced that the door stopper came undone itself, because I kicked it under the door pretty tightly. I did a quick look around just to make sure no one was in the back of the store, and when I didn't see anyone, I went back to work, though I felt a slight sense of unease the whole time. I was stocking the remainder of the bread when I heard a loud sound echo from across the shopping floor. Okay, now someone had to be in here. I got off my knees and went to the middle aisle that intersected all the other aisles. I looked straight down the aisle and stood there for a hot second, and all the way on the opposite side of the store in the dairy aisle, a man dressed in black walked past the middle aisle, looking down in my direction. I felt my heart drop. It felt like that scene from the movie Signs where the alien walks past the birthday party. I had to think logically, that maybe this was someone else filling in for Terry's shift that our boss didn't tell me about. I started to speed walk down the center aisle and yelled "excuse me" very loudly. I looked to the left down every aisle I passed since he went towards the front of the store. In one of those aisles, he was waiting at the end of it, standing there fully facing my direction. When he saw me, he walked out of sight in the direction I was just coming from. I yelled "excuse me" again and started to run down that aisle to catch up to him. I didn't get a good look at his face yet. When I got to the front of the aisle by the cash registers, I looked down the direction he went, and I saw him all the way at the end by the bread aisle. Half his body was hidden behind the shelf. His mouth was hanging open, and he started to wave me over, but he didn't say anything. His face was freaking me out. I attempted one more time to speak to him and said, "Who are you?" And he disappeared behind the shelf. I wasn't being paid enough for this. I went outside to sit in my car and call my boss. He picked up and I told him there was some random freak roaming around the store. He told me to get him out of there if I can, or call the police to get him out. I was not going to attempt to physically remove a crazy person from the store, so I called 911. I waited in my car until a police car showed up. I greeted the officer and asked him to follow me inside. We walked around the place looking for the man, and we saw him at one of the aisles again, creepily standing there again as if playing a game. When the police officer commanded him to come here, he actually listened. He was put in handcuffs, and he was the strangest man I'd ever seen. He kept smiling and looking at me non-stop, licking his lips. He had huge bags under his eyes. The only words he spoke were when answering the police officer, saying he was looking for a snack. I didn't like the way he was looking at me as the police officer was walking him back outside to his car. It was this menacing, threatening smile that I haven't forgotten to this day. I continued my work after that. Needless to say, I never left any of the doors open again. A long time ago, I'm talking like 8 years ago, 2 friends and I, James and Sean, did something really stupid. But at the time, doing stupid things was what we did to pass the time. We're not really friends with James anymore, but Sean and I still talk often, and so oftentimes we'll talk with each other about this story. We were 19 years old. We lived in bumfuck New Jersey. Lots of vacant houses in our old town, and atop a hilly road not far from our houses was an abandoned church. Locals knew about the church. It was on a closed-off road, and it had been abandoned for many years. I'm not sure if it's still standing or what the current state of it is, as I live in Florida now, but James, Sean, and I, being the troublemaking thrill-seekers we were, came up with this genius plan of bringing a Ouija board to the church late one night. This was October, so I guess we were doing it in honor of spooky season. Sean had the Ouija board in his closet, so he brought it. I drove the three of us, so I first picked up James, then Sean, and we just drove straight towards the church. Since the road up the hill to the church was literally blocked off, we had to park on the side of the road and walk from there. We followed the road up the hill to the church, using one flashlight at first, so as not to overdo it and draw any possible attention. But once we were atop the hill, we pretty much all three of us turned on our flashlights. The church was surrounded by woods in basically all directions, and had a gravel parking lot alongside it. The church had been broken into a million times before, and was littered with graffiti, so the big front door was already ajar. Two of us had to work together to pull it open because it scraped on the floor though. Once inside, we naturally just looked around the place with our flashlights to make sure no one else was in there. It was definitely creepy being in that place at night. Sean set up the Ouija board. Then he pulled out these 3 candles from his backpack as well, and he laughed and said it would add to the experience. He placed the 3 candles in a triangle formation around the board, and as they were all lit, we turned off our flashlights. Now the only light in the whole place was from the candles, creating a much more eerie and uncomfortable vibe. We really couldn't see more than maybe 6 feet in all directions. So we began playing with the Ouija board. Sean was doing most of the talking. At this point, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he definitely opened with "Is anybody there?" and the typical cliche Ouija board questions. The planchette started to move and we started to laugh. I knew it was one of them doing it. I feel like it's not possible to play with a Ouija board with your friends without someone jokingly moving around the planchette. We went along with it though, and whoever was moving it spelled out a few words. As this was going on though, we heard a weird crack type sound come from the altar of the church. Best way I could describe it is it sounded like a big piece of wood cracking in half. It was loud and it sounded like it was done by someone. We all jumped in reaction and hurried to shine our phone's flashlights in the direction of the altar. There was no one there as far as we could see. I think both of them were just as freaked out as I was after that. But the place was old and falling apart, so some weird noises here and there didn't seem that crazy, and so we kept going. We all took turns asking the board questions, but the planchette was no longer moving. I think because that crack sound freaked all 3 of us out, and now we were taking it more seriously. This went on for some time, until another sound from the altar area broke the silence again. But before we even had time to shine our lights over there again, something landed on the Ouija board, causing all of us to jump and scream. It was a rock about the size of a golf ball. All 3 of us just had our hands on the planchette 2 seconds ago, and there was no way any of us could have done that. We all 3 got up and ran back out of the church screaming, leaving the Ouija board and candles behind. We ran all the way down the hill and back to my car, and fearing we were being chased, we didn't stick around. I drove us all back to James's house, where we just sat in the car for a good half hour talking, wondering what exactly just happened. Sean is very religious and superstitious as well. He was confident we had reached a spirit of some kind. I don't really believe in any of that stuff. I believe there was someone else in the church with us, which I find to be equally terrifying. Sean went back to the church the next day with James to get his Ouija board back, and to make things even stranger, the Ouija board was missing, but the candles were still in place. When they saw it was missing from the entrance, they decided to just leave right away. This remains to be the single scariest experience of my life. Years ago, I did the night shift at a gas station because I was strapped for cash and needed a second job. I worked the night shift there for a few months. It was around my 2nd or 3rd month that this guy started regularly coming in really late at night, always around 2 a.m. He was about 6 feet tall. He had long, stringy hair. He'd always come in, buy a tall boy, and leave. But after a while, he one night asked me my name. I told him my name, and he just kept saying, "Rob, I like that," as he'd laugh to himself. He cracked open the tall boy he just bought, and walked out of the store talking to himself. He was clearly hammered. This was the night I was curious to see if he had been drinking and driving every single time that he'd come to the store. I watched as he left, and he walked out of sight off the gas station property. That would make sense. He never once bought gas anytime he came in. He'd always just buy alcohol. I'd seen him just about every night after that for a while. He'd come in, some nights noticeably drunker than others, and sometimes he'd just lean on one of the shelves for a while and not say anything. He'd always greet me with a "Hey Rob" anytime he'd come in. One night he was just leaning on a shelf, drinking the tall boy he just bought, not saying anything, just staring at a wall. I asked him for his name finally. He looked at me, took about 5 seconds, and said, "Bob." Now, I always felt like Bob is a go-to fake name when you're lying about your name. I wondered if the first thing that came to mind for him was Bob because it rhymes with my name, but I went with it. I said, "So Bob, where do you work?" He laughed so loud it actually startled me. He said he doesn't work. He said the government completely fucked him out of his job. I got the vibe he was wasted again. He looked at me with an angry-looking face, but interestingly said, "I like you, Rob. You seem like you know what you're doing." I didn't know what that meant, but he walked out of the store right after that. I didn't see him again for a while. I'd say over a week passed, which for a regular like him was a while. Bob always gave me this off, mildly creepy vibe. I figured he was usually drunk, but something was obviously wrong in his personal life. Well, one very stormy night, with less customers than usual, likely because of the storm, I heard the ding of the front door as someone entered, and I swear before looking I imagined it to be Bob, and when I looked, I was shocked to see it was actually him. But it was a much scarier version of Bob. He was completely soaked. He wasn't wearing a rain jacket or using an umbrella. He was just in a dark shirt and jeans. His long hair was drenched, and he was just standing by the door looking straight ahead at the wall. He looked like he was angry, and yet his mind was elsewhere, like his thoughts were running. The way he was standing there blankly, staring at nothing, completely soaked, it was freaking me out. I said, "Bob, are you okay?" He didn't turn his head or move. He stood still and said, "I did something really bad." I asked, "What did you do?" He then looked at me, said, "I need somewhere to hide," then walked past me at the register towards the little restroom hallway. He disappeared behind the wall, and I heard one of the doors open and close. I was genuinely getting uncomfortable with Bob now. I didn't enjoy his presence whenever he was in the store, and tonight something was extra off about him. He seemed like a zombie, and that "I did something really bad" comment was incredibly creepy. Some time passed, and Bob never came out from the bathroom. I assumed he was wasted again, probably passed out or puking. Either way, I didn't want to intervene. And then, the next thing I remember, the lights to the place cut out, and the store was completely dark. I was standing in a pitch-dark gas station during a major storm with an unhinged drunk man. I used the flashlight from behind the counter to make my way towards the back of the store by the inventory storage and the panel board. The door to the back was in the same little hallway as the restrooms. As I walked by the 2 restroom doors, both of them were ajar, and Bob wasn't in either of them. I went through the door to the back. I was planning on going straight to the panel board, but I stopped when I heard a slight dripping in the room somewhere, and the squeaking of wet shoes. My heart sank into my stomach. I said, "Bob," in a very weak and scared voice. I heard squeaks right to my left. When I pointed my flashlight in that corner, there was Bob, with his eyes opened wide, and he lunged at me and started screaming, "I'm gonna fucking kill you." I pushed him off of me as he was clawing at my back. I ran back through the door to the front of the store. He didn't follow me. I grabbed my rain jacket and ran straight to my car. I sat in my car as I dialed 911 and spoke to an operator. I stayed on the line with her, and it didn't take long for a couple police officers to arrive and go inside with me. Bob was still hiding in the back room, huddled in a corner, apparently like some rabid creature. His pupils were huge, I only noticed it then. He was on something. They took him to the station after I told them that he lunged at me, threatened to kill me, and stated that he did something really bad earlier. I found out over a month later that this Bob guy's real name was Martin. He had brutally beaten his ex-wife to death. It might have happened on that same night that he came into the gas station. Long story short, I never wanted to work another night shift at any job ever again after this night. When I was 19 years old, I was still working at a nearby pizza place to help pay for food and gas and stuff. The job was always pretty easy, just taking the order, boxing up the food when it's done, putting it in a bag, and driving it to the given address. I'd done it a million times before, and nothing weird ever happened. It was very repetitive. Tips would usually be around $3 to $5 depending on the distance. Sometimes more generous people would give 10 or more though. I remember this order was just a chicken parm hero and a regular slice. Smaller orders like this usually yielded lesser tips, but I didn't have a choice in which deliveries I did. I was on my way to the address, and of course, the house was apparently on a dead-end block. This block had a more rural feel to it than the rest of the neighborhood. One of the houses had an RV sitting on the grass with a small patch of woods next to it. The other houses looked like little farmhouses. There was a lot more space on this particular street. And then I pulled up to the address. It was this small, weird-looking house with a huge property though. It sat next to what appeared to be an abandoned house with overgrown grass and shrubs. It was probably around 6 p.m. and it was getting pretty dark out, so it was around the time people would start putting on their lights inside their houses. But all the lights in the house were off, and I noticed the front door seemed cracked open. I began to walk over to the front door, and I heard a piano being played. It sounded like it was a couple rooms away at least, muffled by some walls or a door or something. I knocked on the door and then rang the bell after a few minutes, only the doorbell didn't work. The piano was still playing. I felt weird just walking in, so I walked around the property towards the back. The backyard was a literal mess, things scattered all over the grass. I even saw a broken, rusty chain link fence just sitting in the middle of the yard. I went to the back door and knocked really loud. I looked through the glass of the door and saw nothing except for what looked like a really messy storm room. Clearly these people were not neat freaks, to say the least. When nobody answered the back door either, I went back around front and called one of the guys at the pizzeria to confirm the address with him. He took a second to check what he wrote down, and he confirmed that I was at the correct address. So I went back to the front door, pushed it open, and heard the creepy sounding piano music still playing. I yelled, "Pizza's here." The piano stopped. Someone yelled, "Over here." Then the piano resumed. They were playing this simple yet creepy repetitive song as if on loop. There were also no lights on in this house, so it was almost hard to see in there. I walked straight, getting closer to the sound of the music. The smell inside the house was very musty and off-putting. When I got halfway into, I guess what you'd call the foyer, I felt very uncomfortable. I wasn't going to go any further. I yelled, "I'm by the front door, sir." The music stopped, this time for good, and now there was just silence. I backed towards the door again so that I would be closer to the outside. I was expecting to hear footsteps coming towards me, but no, it was just dead silent. I said, "Sir?" And a voice from another room said, "Yes, sorry, I have trouble walking. Could you just bring it in here, please?" I asked, "What room are you in, sir?" And he took a moment to answer back, "If you just walk through the living room, I'm in the dining room." There were no directions on the phone to do any of this, so this was very strange. I thought for a second about my next course of action. I felt bad leaving in the case that this was some old, feeble man just living in a messy house. I started walking through the living room, and there was an opening that led to what I presumed to be the dining room. Me being my overly cautious and paranoid self was still suspicious. Instead of walking straight into the dining room, I peeked around the wall just enough for one eye to see into the room. I saw the piano, but there was no one sitting at it. I also didn't see anyone in the entire room. With that, I quietly but quickly walked back towards the front door, shut the door behind me, and drove back to the pizzeria. I explained that I got a sketchy vibe inside the house. My boss was completely understanding, especially when the alleged customer didn't call back asking why I left. That said everything. I didn't really understand the logic in trying to commit a robbery in your own house, and nor did my boss or coworkers. So later that night after work, I looked up that address, and that house was foreclosed on months ago, and it had been vacant. When I told this to everyone, they had the same mouth-dropping reaction I did. I was truly mere steps away from probably getting robbed. That, or someone was trying to play a horrible prank on an unsuspecting pizza delivery guy.
I was 22 years old, attending a Halloween party at my former best friend Nick's house, who died of a heroin overdose in 2013. Before his death, he would throw big Halloween parties every year at his house, as his parents routinely flew to New York every year to attend their own friend's party. He was always a big Halloween freak, so the whole house was littered with truly horrifying props that we all knew Nick spent way too much money on. He even put up giant walls of cardboard and covered them with wallpapers to create a haunted maze of sorts. I want to keep this story PG-13 rated, so I'll skip the weed, beer, LSD, and sex and get right to the part where things got bad. I'll admit, we weren't in our right minds. None of us were. Anyone who came to Nick's parties knew what went down. Me, Nick, and a few other guys, Vinny G, Joey, and Q, were upstairs in Nick's room smoking a bong when we heard two steady, loud bangs come from downstairs. Nick clumsily but panickingly rushed to open the door and see what was going on. There were sounds of screaming of both guys and girls. I remember quite clearly it sounded as if there were a crowd of people screaming for their lives down there. We all called Nick to come back in and shut the door. Even under the influence of drugs, we all knew what was going on. Nick ran back inside and shut the door quickly but also quietly, locking it behind him. He turned to us and had on the facial expression of someone who had just witnessed murder. "What did you see? What's going on?" we all shouted at him. He told us to hide before anything else. We all knew why. From that point on, we didn't ask questions. Nick hid the lights and hid in the closet with Joey, while I hid under the bed with Q, and Vinny G hid in the storage box. We could hear the blasting music from downstairs turn off, followed by a grown man screaming at everyone to shut up. One unfortunate girl let out a scream of shock and fear, and after another bang, silence. The man started shouting at everyone again, but personally I couldn't hear it too well, and I certainly as hell wouldn't remember exactly what he was shouting. We heard 2 other men shouting. By now there were a confirmed 3 intruders in the house, but there could have been more for all we knew at that point. We heard the sound of boots stomping up the stairs and then coming halfway down the hall and stopping outside the bedroom door. The intruder on the other side of the door tried the doorknob, but when he realized it was locked, he started ramming into the door with most likely his shoulder. After a few failed attempts at that, the sound of a few shots to the doorknob were clearly enough to break the lock, allowing the door to swing open. We heard cries from downstairs after the shots to the doorknob, followed by silence and gunshot. Me and Nick had our hands on our mouths to shield our breathing noises. I watched through the transparent cloth that hung from the bottom of Nick's bed as the black boots with overlapping ripping denim jeans moved instinctively to the closet. He opened the door. I could hear Nick begging for the intruder not to kill him, offering a generous amount of money if they would leave. Nick gave himself up as the house owner. That's when the intruder ordered him downstairs. The rest of us stayed put. Apparently Joey hadn't been caught with Nick. We stayed under the bed, shaking and afraid. There was near silence from downstairs, other than Nick talking with the intruders, but whatever they were saying was much too low for us to hear. It felt like a near 20 minutes before the front door slammed shut and Nick came running back upstairs to tell us that they were gone. I think the most horrifying moment of my life was when I stepped downstairs back into the living room and saw the 2 dead bodies laying lifelessly on the ground, holes in their heads spewing out blood. Jen and Robbie, 2 good friends that I still miss. I'll spare you the details of what happened when the police arrived, but despite the fact that the house smelled like a marijuana greenhouse, the police were more interested in finding out who the masked men were that killed 2 innocent college students. Oh yeah, Nicky told the 4 of us who were hiding in his room that there were 4 intruders in total, all wearing fedoras, vendetta masks, coats, and gloves. They demanded $100,000 in cash, and when Nick could not provide it, they demanded he fill their empty sack with his most valued possessions. All of the partygoers held hostage in the room were also forced to throw their wallets into the sack or they would be shot. After the incident, Nick became depressed. He started drinking too much, becoming an alcoholic. He stopped showing up to school and ultimately ended up dropping out. He started the use of heavier drugs, such as meth and heroin. I had one good talk with him since the incident, and he was more real during this talk than he had ever been. He told me, with tears rolling down his cheeks and a pipe in his hand, he lived in constant pain, knowing he caused the death of 2 of his best friends. Nick died of a heroin overdose in July of 2013, not even a year after the incident. It was my first Halloween living in my own house away from my parents. I live in a small corner house with a basement but no upstairs, a house my parents paid half for. It was 11 o'clock at night. I was sitting in the living room watching scary Halloween movies when I found myself getting up to answer a knock at the door. But then I stopped and thought, who could be at the door at 11 p.m.? Surely there were no more trick-or-treaters out. I had a pretty good feeling it was a late-night Halloween ding-dong-ditcher, so I gave it a second. Then I shot a glance to the porch through the window. They were gone already. Yup, ding-dong-ditchers. I sat back down, not thinking twice about it, and again, knocking at the front door. "Get lost," I yelled. I was not in the mood for punky kids. They ignored my demands and started pounding now, not just knocking. I was pissed now. I leaped up and swung the door open. No one was there once again. I slipped on my shoes and headed outside to begin searching the bushes for the kids, but there was nobody in sight. Not in the bushes, not behind my car, not across the street. I was done answering. I didn't want to feed into their fun anymore, so I went back inside, double-locked the door, and went to my bedroom, also locking that door, just to feel safer, I guess. Even over the TV, I could still hear the stupid kids pounding on my front door repeatedly. I was so close to calling the cops to get them away, but that would undoubtedly lead to my house being egged or TP'd. The pounding continued for an uncomfortably long time, more than half an hour. I thought these kids must be filming something for YouTube and were desperate for a reaction, but I wasn't going to give it to them. At some point I dozed off with the TV on, only to wake up to the knocking again. I looked at the clock. It was 2 in the fucking morning. How could those kids still be at it, I thought. I turned the TV off and sat up with my ears open. For a few moments, my heart completely stopped as I realized the knocking was not at my front door, but rather at my bedroom door. I jumped out of bed, looking around my room like a madman for something to use as a weapon. They knew I was awake now. They were trying the doorknob, trying to bust down the door. These weren't any kids. By some miracle, I came up with an idea. It was a long shot, but it was all I could think of. I turned on the receiver to my speaker system, plugged in my iPhone, brought up the YouTube app, typed in 45 gunshot sound effect, turned on the volume and pressed play. The sound of a gunshot echoed out of the speakers. It sounded real enough. I paused the video after the first shot and yelled, "That was a warning shot. Leave now or I won't hesitate to shoot you in the head." And it worked. I heard 2 pairs of footsteps stomping over my wood floors and out the front door. I gave it a moment before opening my bedroom door and peeking outside. They were gone, but the front door was left wide open. I quickly shut it, called the police, and that's where my story ended.
So I was never really a big Halloween person, mostly because I grew up without many friends, and once I passed the age of 10, I couldn't use the excuse of going with my mom anymore. And it's not like I had friends to go with. So this last Halloween, I was 14 years old. I do have a little sister who's only 8, so my mom went trick-or-treating with her. My one really good friend, Steve, already had plans and I didn't want to impose, so it didn't seem like I'd be trick-or-treating this year. I felt a tiny part of me explode with happiness on the inside when my mom asked me to stay home and hand out candies. Now I felt like I had a job to do that didn't involve me trick-or-treating alone like a loser. My mom left with my sister at about 6 o'clock, about an hour after she got home from work. She told me to expect her back around 9, so I was relaxing on the couch in the living room, watching the Scary Movie marathon on AMC, and occasionally answering the door to give candy to the kiddies. And while doing that, the kitchen phone began to ring. I remember the ringer was set so loud it actually made me jump. I picked up the phone, and the other end remained silent, except for a bit of fumbling and background noises. Sounds you'd expect when somebody's holding a phone. I think I said hello about 5 times before the person on the other end hung up. I just knew it was somebody pulling a Halloween prank call on me. What else could I do but ignore it? That worked well enough for the next few minutes of watching TV, answering the phone, until the phone rang again. Same unknown number coming up on the caller ID. I wanted to see where this was going, so I picked it up once more. This time I could hear a very faint breathing on the other end. "Alright, Steve, I know it's you," I said into the phone. They hung up. By this point, I didn't want to say I was scared, but I was for sure a bit uneasy. It was a long time before that phone rang again. It was getting later, darker, and the doorbell seemed to be ringing less and less. I was watching the original Friday the 13th when it happened again. The sound of that phone ringing had become sickening, as I knew who it would be, or rather, I didn't. For some reason, I gave in again and picked up. And once again, silence, other than the faint breathing and fumbling of the phone. It was like this for almost half a minute before they finally spoke in an exaggerated deep voice.
"I'll be paying you a visit tonight."
I had enough of this joke. I told them to fuck off and hang up the phone, promising to myself not to pick it up again. I'd say about half an hour later, out of the blue, all the power in the house was cut. The lights went out. The TV turned off. Complete darkness. I stood up, now frozen in fear. when loud and angry thumping came from the front door. I completely lost it and began screaming like a girl, but there was something coming from outside. Laughter. I recognized that laughter. I opened the door and there he was. Stephen. I shoved him nearly down the steps out of anger. "So, that was you who made those dumb phone calls?" I asked. He nodded while laughing. "I didn't sound like you on the phone. Let me hear you do that voice again," I said. "What?" He seemed confused. "I didn't say anything, you idiot. I just called and did that heavy breathing." I thought he was lying at first. But then my heart dropped. I had him follow me to the fuse box outside. Just as I feared, it had been opened and all the wires had been snipped. I think we ran faster than any Olympic champions back into the house. I called my mom, who told us to stay inside and wait for the police, who she then called. The call was traced to a payphone outside of a nearby bar. I still wonder, was this just a dumb Halloween prank gone too far? Or was it a potential break-in, and God knows what else waiting to happen? I don't think I ever want to find out. When I was younger, my friends and I went trick-or-treating every year. This one particular year, as we were trick-or-treating, we passed a man who stood still with a mask on, holding a lantern. As we walked past him, he turned his whole body around and followed us with his eyes. We were creeped out, but there were plenty of people around, so we made our way to the next house. My friends and I saw him over and over again, as we made our way from house to house, and he seemed to be following us in typical horror story form. We walked so slow, we couldn't figure out how he kept up with us. At one house, when we hadn't seen him for a while, we got our candy. As we turned around to walk back to the street, the masked man stood in the road waiting for us. Immediately, we knocked back on the door and told the owners of the house about it. The masked man continued walking down the street, and we didn't see him again that night. Later on, an adult friend of the family told us he saw a masked man hiding behind a tree, waving little kids over, and he only backed off when he threatened to call the police.
I was trick-or-treating with my friend Casey. We were both 11 years old at the time. We were walking across a small wooden bridge over a small river that many called Jack Winkle River when a black Jeep pulled up on the other side of the bridge, basically blocking our way. We turned around and hurried away. We were the types of kids to obey the stranger danger rules. We could hear the windows of the Jeep rolling down, and a man with a raspy smoker's voice called for us to come back. He was yelling for help, asking us for directions. I yelled sorry, and we continued to hurry away. The Jeep couldn't fit over that small bridge, so it pulled away and drove down the road on the other side. We thought we had made our escape from the creepy driver, when here came an SUV barreling around the corner and down the street, slamming on the brakes in front of us. Once again, the driver rolled down the windows. Now with them right next to us, we could see there were two passengers in the car as well. An old guy with gray curly hair and a mustache in the backseat, who also had a raspy smoker's voice, told us to get in the car, that they have free bags of candy. The Jeep banged a three-point turn and tailed us wherever we went. At one point, the Jeep finally accelerated past us, came to a stop, and the back and front passenger side doors opened, and the two creepy men stepped out lunging at us. We dropped our bags of candy and ran straight for my house, which was in sight now. We rang the doorbell desperately at least 20 times. The old men that were chasing us couldn't run fast, and when they saw us running to my house, they turned back. My mom opened the door and we screamed and pointed at the Jeep that was backing away in the other direction. She shoved us inside and locked the door and called the police like any mom would. She reported the black Jeep with 3 men inside, older looking, raspy voices, and any other descriptions we gave. My mom was freaking out all night, worried about the fact that they knew where we lived now. My dad tried to calm her, but she couldn't calm down. Ultimately, the police agreed to send an unmarked police car to stay out front and keep guard for 3 hours. That made my mom feel a little better, but what made us all feel better was when my dad woke us up to see the flashing red and blue lights outside of the unmarked police car. They had pulled over an SUV, a black Jeep, and 3 men were in cuffs. The 3 old creeps that tried to kidnap me and Casey. My dad went outside to talk to the officer and most likely confirmed that those were the men. Me and Casey went to the doorway and screamed at the men for their attention. They looked, and we both gave them the finger. My mom then pulled us back in and shut the door, sending us to bed. It went from the worst night of both of our lives to ultimately the best night of our lives. This story took place on Halloween night. I took my 7-year-old daughter Jamie trick-or-treating for a few hours, and when we got back, I cooked dinner, we watched TV together, and then I sent her to bed. I was feeling especially tired that night, so I brushed up and went to sleep. Shortly after, my daughter entered the room and told me there was someone in her closet. I assured her there was no one in her closet. She asked to sleep with me, but I once again assured her that she was safe in her room. She reluctantly went back to her room and shut the door. I made a mental note that if she came back again, I would walk her to her closet and show her that there's no one in there. Surely enough, 5 minutes later she came back. I asked her why she thought there was someone in her closet. She responded saying she heard someone moving around and things falling over. Honestly, when she said that, it kind of made my heart jump for a second. I walked her to her room and turned on the lights. I jokingly asked, "Is anybody in there?" We stood and listened. I didn't expect to hear anything. There it was, a thud from inside the closet. I screamed at Jamie to run to the neighbors and call the police. As she did, I swung the door open and was shocked to find the neighbor's son, Randy, sitting on top of my daughter's Lego box. I grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and yanked him up aggressively. I walked him angrily back to his parents' house next door and found Jamie ringing the doorbell. When they answered, I shoved him inside right into his father and explained everything. I told him I wouldn't press charges, but if I ever caught him near my daughter again, they would all be sorry. Randy's dad, Mark, slapped him across the face, then asked me to come inside to allow Randy to explain himself. Me and Jamie both went inside. Apparently, while I was taking Jamie trick-or-treating, he had snuck into our house through an open window and hid in her closet with his friend Daryl. I asked him if this Daryl kid was still in my house. He said yes. I told Jamie to wait with Mark while I ran back into my house, and right as I entered, there he was. This Daryl kid, uglier and shadier looking than Randy. He had my daughter's underwear in his hand. What I did next was completely out of fatherly protective anger. I grabbed the little shit by the throat and threw him to the floor, slapping him 4 times in the face, then hesitantly allowing him to get up and leave. The only reason I didn't call the police was because of my close friendship with Mark. But I made my point very strongly that if they ever so even waved to my daughter again, they would be in the news the next day. We went back to sleep. I let Jamie sleep with me after that incident. She was horrified. The next morning, I found a small drill hole in her closet door. The sick little bastards were spying on my daughter while she slept, at the same time playing with her underwear. Maybe you don't understand the horror of this story unless you're a parent, but there are many days where I think I made a mistake not calling the police. I still can, but nothing has happened since, and I figure I shouldn't create more trouble now. Jamie's 13 now, and that creep Randy has since gone away to college.
We had just moved into our large new house in Mississauga, Ontario, in an area called Winston Churchill. It was Halloween night, and my parents, my 4 other sisters, my brother and I were unpacking our stuff in our new bedrooms. We had just finished and were talking to each other about leaving our old schools and friends behind. My mother called us to do chores. I was really tired since it was 11:30 at night, way past the trick-or-treating buzz, and we had to do chores now? It seemed to take forever, but when I was done, I decided to go to my bedroom and get some sleep. I heard what sounded like footsteps in the upstairs hallway. Thinking it was my brother or sister, I got up to shout at them for bothering me while I was sleeping, but there, as far as I could tell, there was no one there. I rushed down to the basement where my parents, sister, and brother were considerately working. I asked them all if they had been upstairs, and they replied no. Now I was getting pretty freaked out, but I had to believe it was just my imagination and shrugged it off as if it had never happened. I went back to my bed, which was now freezing cold. I had to put on a sweater. It was just too cold. I woke up in the middle of the night around 12:30 a.m. after everyone had gone to sleep. I heard this loud banging sound that seemed to be coming from my parents' bedroom. I thought it might be my brother or sister waiting to get a drink of water, but was too scared to go alone. I was wrong. The banging continued, getting louder by the minute. I couldn't get to sleep, so I decided to check it out. I walked into the hallway, and believe me, there was no one there. As I walked in, the banging seemed to stop. I stared at the door, only for a quick moment before deciding to go back to bed. After a couple of minutes, the banging started again. Now I was totally chilled to my very last bone. I tried to sleep again, but I couldn't. Very typical of me. The door to my bedroom creaked open, as if someone were pushing it lightly. But it was too dark to see who or what could have caused it. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Who is it? Let me go back to sleep. Very light footsteps began to move closer to my bed. I thought it was one of my sisters, until I turned onto my side after the footsteps stopped and saw a figure standing next to my bed. A figure at least 7 feet tall. I choked the urge to scream. Nothing came out. I lay there in unimaginable horror as the figure finally said, "Boo." That was when I screamed at the top of my lungs and covered my eyes, when my parents thrust open the door to my room and flicked on the light. There was no figure there. There was no figure by my bed. I cried out everything to them, the thumping, the figures. My siblings came into the doorway and watched me freak out. I asked my parents if they heard the knocking on their door. Surely they must have. It was their door after all. But they said there was no knocking. Not that they knew of. They all looked at me like I was crazy. But I know I'm not. You can't just imagine something like that. Something so real. I'll never forget this night. I know I won't. It was a few years ago, Halloween night. We were all 20 years old. Right at that age, where going to haunted house attractions is one of the best things to do on Halloween. The attraction was called Scare House Journey to the Basement or something. It was only open for 4 straight years in our town. It was never heard of again. This was its 4th and final year of operation. It was a very high quality and surprisingly scary haunted house. One of the best ones I've been to. This was not a tour guided attraction. It was a group exploration attraction. Basically, a maze where the only way out was to make your way to the basement. Find one of the keys, then find the exit and use the key you found to unlock the door. It was a very unique haunted house, that's for sure. Unfortunately, it wasn't a good night for us. And you're about to learn why. We started out in the living room of the house. To give as much detail as I can about the room, there was a giant open coffin sitting right smack in the middle of the room. There were very convincing spiderwebs covering just about every inch of every corner of the room. All the furniture was antique and dusty looking, and of course, blood was stained on the creaky wood floor. We could tell right away this haunted house was going to be great. The next room was the dining room. That was where things got creepy. The rooms following the dining room were all very dimly lit by artificial lanterns hooked onto the walls. On several occasions, actors jumped out at us in horrifically convincing costumes as expected. And yet they still got me every time. We actually spent a lot of time going in circles trying to find the basement. This wasn't a real wide-open house. It was designed to be like a maze, with many rooms and fake doors. It took a long time for us to finally find the basement door, and I have to admit, I was nervous to go down there. It was completely pitch black down there. We started to think that it might have been an employees-only area where they kept props. It was just too dark down there to see. It was stated many times that no cell phones were allowed while in the attraction, so we couldn't use cell phone screens as lights. If we wanted to get out of there, we had no choice but to go down there. Each step created a creak more painful to the ears than fingernails scratching on a chalkboard. We were all laughing, telling each other how fucking freaked out we were. I had my hands out in front of me as if I was searching for anything in the complete darkness. I banged into somebody and apologized. "Who was that?" I asked, expecting it to be one of my friends. No answer. Whoever I just bumped into placed their hand on my shoulder, and I took off running and screaming while at the same time laughing. There was something so disturbing about being in that huge pitch-black basement, knowing someone was in there with us. One of my friends thankfully found a key on a desk in the corner of the room. We all ran back upstairs, back to the light, and found the exit door. The actual experience and process of getting through that maze of a haunted house was much longer than my story makes it out to be, but that's not where things got horrifying. Right outside the exit door was a small bin with a sign that said, "Drop keys here, please." That's how the staff would collect the keys and bring them back down to the basement. Halfway off the premises of the haunted house, the exit door opened, and a really tall person dressed in a black robe and bloody pig mask stepped out and started following in our direction. He, or she, though it was most likely a he, so I'll refer to them as a he, appeared to be one of the staff members for the attraction. As we walked further away from the attraction, so did the guy in the costume. It seemed to all of us that he was following us by this point. One of my friends called. "We don't have the key if that's what you want. We dropped it in the little bin." But that didn't do the trick. As a joke, we started running just to see if he would too, and he did. We stopped, and so did he. We stood still, and so did he. At first it was funny, maybe it was just a joke, but as we got closer to my friend Eddie's house, we were starting to discuss if we should reveal where he lives to this guy. He had been following us for at least 5 blocks now, so if it was a joke, it had gone far enough. Eddie's parents were both home, so we felt safe to go inside. Apparently, Eddie's front door was broken, whatever that meant, so we had to go run back. We jokingly waved at the douchebag still following us and walked to Eddie's backyard, shutting the gate behind us. Wiping our feet on his welcome mat on the back door, we heard the gate open. The man emerged from behind the side of the house and began walking towards us once again. This time, much faster. Eddie opened the back door and called to his dad, telling him to get his gun. This seemed to grab the masked man's attention. He slowed down, turned his head to face Eddie. Eddie's dad emerged, angry as hell, and aimed his pistol at the masked coward. He raised his hands up and cried out for him not to shoot, that he's only 27. Eddie's dad told him to get lost and never come back, and the next time he wouldn't think twice about pulling the trigger. Personally, I wish Eddie's dad had made the guy get on his knees and take off the mask, then call the police. That guy got off too easily. For all we know, he could have been armed as well. We contacted the haunted house attraction, and they informed us that they had no such employee dressed in a pig mask.
Back in 2017, I had moved to a smaller town in rural Illinois, and I only knew one person in town. I'm a bit of an introvert, so I had a hard time making friends, especially being single and in my early 20s living in a town filled with a population that was mostly retired. My friend, who I'll call Clara, introduced me to an older couple that were maybe in their early 50s and were looking for a dog sitter. She thought it would be a good way for me to make some connections while living there. We had made time to meet at their house so I could see the lay of the land and meet the dogs. The home was a 70s brick ranch style, severely outdated and slightly falling apart in some places. I explored abandoned houses for fun, so I didn't mind. The dogs were sweet, but as for the couple, they were odd. They were friendly enough, but while I'd be speaking to them, instead of making eye contact, They'd be doing more of a full body scan as if sizing me up. They would also guide me to rooms and not really say anything on the tour, just open the doors and let me look and then close them. I should also mention they sell firearms out of their home as a side business, which I didn't really mind, but they had cameras everywhere. Outside and in, hallways, living room, kitchen, office, garage, backyard, driveway, kitchen table, etc. They told me it was just for insurance purposes due to their business. It made me a little uncomfortable, but I was just really hoping to make some sort of connection in this town and some money. Then the time came for me to come and watch the dogs. They'd been gone for a week and I'd been working from home, so I made myself comfortable. I set up my workspace in their office, which had a monitor that had cameras outside displayed so I could see all around the house, which was kind of nice because I felt a little at ease being alone on a decent-sized property in the middle of nowhere. I should also note, the dogs had a doggy door so they could go outside 24/7, and the house backed up to the woods. First night was fine. Second night, I noticed one of the cameras went offline that watched the driveway. I didn't think much of it, as Wi-Fi out in rural areas is finicky, but I still went and checked just in case maybe the camera fell or something. As I walked to the door, I heard the dogs get off the ground and scramble frantically to run out the doggy door and start barking like crazy. Mind you, it's about 10 at night, so I got freaked out and wanted to get the dogs to come back inside. So I made my way to the back door and noticed the dogs were both barking like crazy at the same spot at the part of the fence that backs up to the woods. I didn't see anything, but I'd seen enough horror movies to where I was starting to psych myself out and I had to find a way to calm down and get the dogs in. So treats it was. I got them back in and blocked off the doggy door with a chair that weighed a decent amount and called it a night. Next morning, I woke up late and threw myself off and had to start working before I could feed the dogs. But then I noticed they weren't at the front of the bed anymore. The house was quiet. I got up and called their names and they didn't respond. So I walked to the back door and they were in the yard just doing their thing. Then it hit me. How did they get outside when I blocked the door? My heart sank and I felt all the blood rush from my head as I turned to my right to see the chair that I had pushed in front of the doggy door now was sitting in the corner of the room. Panic set in immediately, and I called my friend Clara to explain the situation and that I needed her to come here ASAP to do a walkthrough of the house with me because I just knew there was no way the dogs could move that chair 5+ feet. She came over about 20 minutes later, and I made a beeline for the front door and let her in. We both went room by room and couldn't find anything or anyone. It just didn't make any sense. She tried to reassure me that maybe I didn't have it pushed over as much as I thought I did. I figured I'd just accept it for what it was and just push through on overly high alert for the next 4 days. Clara left, and I went back to work. The day was fine and quiet, and I began to relax again. I finished making dinner and decided to get some work done. I sat down in the office and just happened to turn to look at the monitor with the camera views on it and noticed all of them were offline. My stomach dropped. I knew one going out was possible, but all 4? That was just too coincidental. Due to the nature of the business the couple ran, I texted them to let them know their cameras were down and if they wanted me to try and troubleshoot it for them, I'd be happy to. Also because I didn't like not having eyes on the outside of this place. A couple hours went by and no response. They're on vacation after all, so I just figured I'd have to let it go and suck it up until they get back to me. It was late, close to midnight, when I finally settled in and was watching TV to fill the void of silence that surrounded me when I heard the dogs get up and scramble to the doggy door again. I shot up and out of bed, my heart pounding out of my chest because I knew something was wrong. I grabbed the knife I had sitting next to the bed and walked to the back door looking out into the yard and couldn't see anything. The dogs had already stopped barking and were now just sniffing along the fence. I did that whisper yell to get them to come back in when I heard a thump come from the other side of the house. Frozen, I had to make a decision fast, try to get the dogs in, or investigate whatever the hell just fell. I got the dogs in just in case it was some animal they were after. I didn't want them to get skunk sprayed or something. They wandered into the living room and hopped on the couches, and I slid the chair back in front of the door. I took a picture with my phone this time just so I could reassure myself I did it. I made my way to the back room where I heard the thump noise, and I immediately froze. I'm not sure if anyone else can understand, but when there's a presence in the room, there's almost this small difference in the atmosphere. There's a white noise, not breathing or movement, just a break in the stagnance of the silence. Well, regardless if you don't, I felt it. I wasn't going to be that person that kept seeking out the exact area of where this was coming from, so I asked, "Who's there? What are you doing here?" Silence. I then called out the names of the couple that lived there to see if for some wild reason they were in their own home at midnight when they weren't supposed to be, but again met with silence. Clara has a kid and husband, so I didn't want to bother her, so I figured the next thing I would do was call the police. But then I felt that wash of embarrassment in case it was nothing. They'd think I'm an idiot. I stepped back into the hallway that led to the room and slowly closed the door as quiet as possible and locked the door. I went and sat in the living room with the dogs with my phone in one hand and knife in the other. I couldn't make a decision on what to do. About 20 minutes went by and I received a text from the wife saying, "Hi, don't worry about the cameras, you're safe." I was thrown off because they were in Florida and it was almost 2 in the morning there. And also, what do you mean I'm safe? I didn't even mention safety being the issue. I was getting ready to give a general sounds good text when I got another text from the wife. It read, "Also, can you make sure that I didn't leave the garage door open to the inside? I don't want anything getting in. The door she's mentioning is in that back room. I didn't want to go back in there for obvious reasons, so I just didn't respond and pretended like I was asleep and couldn't." 2 minutes later, she texted again, "Hi, I know it's late, but can you please check on this for me, as I'm worried." My gut was screaming no, but maybe the noise was a wild animal that got in. I didn't respond, but got up to go check, knife and phone in hand still. As I approached the door, I heard a shuffle from the back room. I stopped and stood there silent to see if I heard anything else before I opened the door. My phone lit up, and she texted me, "I see you're up. Can you please go in and check?" I couldn't move. I forgot they had cameras in the hallway and in the living room. Why were they pushing this at 1 a.m? Now knowing I was being watched, reluctantly, I slowly unlocked the door and opened it with my arms stretched as far as I could to get an open view of the room from as far as possible. I didn't hear anything or see anything, so I took a couple steps into the room and saw the door to the garage was in fact open. It was so damn dark in there, I didn't want to get any closer, but I had to do it and just get this over with. I approached the door, and a light appeared from my phone as I had gotten a notification, and the faint light from my phone lit a portion of the garage doorway I was about 2 steps from, when I noticed the outline of an arm pressed against the wall right next to the door. Fight or flight kicked in immediately. I turned and ran back through the doorway and slammed the door to the back room shut and locked it. I grabbed my keys off the kitchen counter and ran out the front door. I fumbled with the keys as I was shaking and panting, and I got the door unlocked when I noticed the garage door was opening and halfway up. I started my car, and as the headlights lit up the now open garage, I saw in the back corner a grown man in a jacket squatting behind a box right next to the door I was going to close. I didn't waste time and floored it in reverse down the driveway and drove immediately to the police station. I was crying and explained what happened, and they said they'd send a unit to check out the house. I sat in my car at the police station texting the wife about what just happened, seeing as they had access to the cameras and could maybe see if someone was in there. No response. About a half hour later, the police officer came back to the station and let me know the garage door was open, but the house was clear and there was no signs of a break-in. They even checked around the perimeter of the yard and nothing was out of the ordinary. They knew I was scared out of my mind, so they offered to follow me back and do another check with me there. After it was done and I saw with my own eyes no one was there, they left. I couldn't sleep. It was going on almost 3 or 4 in the morning at this point, so I just laid on the couch by the dogs, wide awake, gripping the kitchen knife. About 20 minutes after the officer left, I got a text from the wife. "Hi, plans changed. We'll be home soon. You can go home now." The complete disregard for the situation that just unfolded that I texted her about, the letting me know you're coming home 4 days early and didn't mention it, and will be here just hours after all of this? I didn't dwell on the moment. I grabbed my stuff and left. Their home is on a rural road, but only about a quarter mile from the main street. As I got halfway to the stop sign and looked in my rearview mirror, I saw a car with no headlights on pull into their driveway. I texted the wife and said, "Someone just pulled into your driveway as I was leaving." Almost instantly, I got a text back that read, "I know." Chills ran down my spine. They were setting me up. They'd been in the area that whole time. The dogs barking in the middle of the night were probably alerting me that they had been driving on the path behind the house. They shut the cameras off so I couldn't see their creeping movements on the property while I was right there inside, oblivious. I never heard from them again. My friend profusely apologized, saying she had no idea how weird they were, and that she'd only known them as coming into the local diner every now and then. She said after that incident they never came in again. I'm 30 now, and I still have trouble with the entire situation. I know I'm okay and I'm safe, but knowing I was just seconds away from God knows what is a feeling I can't seem to shake, and not sure if I ever will be able to. I work as a bartender at a bar and restaurant in a suburb just outside Baltimore. I'll do my best to explain the layout so the story makes sense. It's a busy place with a unique setup. There are no waiters, just bartenders like me and the cooks in the back. If you want to find food or non-alcoholic drinks, you have to order them at the bar, and when everything's ready, you grab it from the counter. I'm not sure why things are done that way, but I guess it had something to do with management being cheap and trying to avoid hiring waiters. Either way, it keeps things fast-paced, which I actually like. For whatever reason, the place is really popular, even though I personally don't think it's anything super special. The atmosphere is lively most nights, with great music, a buzzing crowd, and a standing area near the DJ booth where people gather to dance and chat. The constant flow of customers and the high-energy vibe make the job fly by. I love meeting and talking to new people, so the gig is perfect for me. I would probably lose my mind if I had to wait long periods of time between serving guests, but that's just me. I bet some people are the opposite. That particular night started off like any other. It was a weekend, so things were going to be super busy. I was ready. After a certain time, the bar started filling up with people. It looked like more of a younger college crowd that night, which meant more dancing, more spilling, and a rowdier environment in general. Oh yeah, and worse tips, which kind of sucked for me. This one group of kids just kept on ordering round after round of tequila shots faster than I could line up the salt and limes. It's always chaos when they take over the bar. One of them was so plastered he used the same pickup line on me like 3 times. I was running around doing my thing when I noticed an elderly couple walk in and sit down at the booth in the corner of the restaurant. At first glance, there was nothing strange about them. I just thought it was interesting that 2 people that age would want to come into a rowdy place like this. I didn't have too much time to think about it though, so I went back to work. Fast forward maybe 30 minutes to an hour. I was halfway through pouring a line of gin and tonics when I noticed the couple again. My hands kept working, muscle memory taking over, but my brain was stuck on them for some reason. That's when it hit me. They were just sitting there motionlessly. They hadn't ordered anything either. No food and definitely not any drinks, I would have remembered. I looked a little closer and realized that they weren't even looking at each other. They were both fixated at the wall next to them. From what I could tell, it didn't look like they were talking either. It was the strangest thing. I was beyond curious, but the bar was slammed, and I had too much to do to spend time wondering about it. I figured they might be waiting for someone, or didn't realize how the place worked. Maybe they were waiting for a waiter to take their order. When I finally had a break, I decided to check on them myself. I walked over to the table and put on my most polite smile. As I approached, neither of them turned to face me. They were both still staring at the wall like statues. I cleared my throat and asked them if they wanted anything to eat or drink. The woman didn't even flinch. She kept staring at the wall like I hadn't spoken at all. The man turned his head slowly, like he was moving in slow motion. When his face came into view, I felt a chill run through me. His skin was pale and wrinkled, and his eyes were almost sunken into his face completely. He didn't speak, just stared at me and shook his head once, firmly but silently. Something about the way he looked at me made my stomach twist. I muttered something in response and quickly returned to the bar. I had the weirdest feeling in my gut after that. Those people looked like they didn't even belong in this century, let alone this bar. I didn't look over at that booth for a long time. Eventually, things started to die down a little, and I remembered the couple. I glanced over impulsively, and I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. Both of them were staring directly at me now. I made direct eye contact with the woman, but she never averted her gaze. I don't think I'd ever been more uncomfortable at my job than I was in that moment. I looked away and pretended to be busy, trying not to freak out completely. By the time I glanced back again, the booth was empty. I was relieved. I was just glad that they were gone, as mean as that sounds. By the end of the night, I was still thinking about the whole thing. As I wiped down the bar and closed up with my coworker Karen, I decided to ask her if she saw anything strange. She's, I guess, what you would call a vet. She's been working there for years and prides herself on noticing everything and everyone that comes through the doors. When I asked her about the couple, she gave me a confused look and said she didn't know what I was talking about. I looked at her blankly and told her I was talking about the elderly couple that was sitting in the corner booth. She shook her head and told me she didn't remember seeing anyone like that. She then jokingly asked me if I was hallucinating, which got a playful laugh out of me, but on the inside though, I was losing it. I knew what I had seen. I asked her if she was sure, and she crossed her arms before listing at least 10 random people who had ordered food that night and what they were wearing. I laughed again and complimented her memory, but like I said before, I was dying on the inside. By the time we locked up, I started doubting myself. As I walked to my car, I noticed something that made me nearly drop my keys in fear. Across the street, there were 2 dark figures standing under a lone streetlight. I knew it was them. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. I didn't wait another second. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped out of the lot without another look. The drive home was awful. I was trying not to break down the whole time. I just kept repeating, "Oh my God," over and over. I had so many questions. Had Karen somehow missed them? Were those people even real? Was I going insane? I couldn't explain it. I thought I was going crazy. I wish this story had a resolved ending, but it doesn't. I never saw those people again. I never got any kind of explanation. I don't think I ever will. I apologize in advance if I mess up any details about the story I'm about to tell. This is something that my best friend told me multiple times several years ago now. It's one of those stories so unsettling you can't shake it even after hearing it more than once. My friend's dad was a logger, specifically a tree saw operator. For those who don't know, a tree saw is a massive machine capable of cutting down giant trees and slicing them to specific lengths. His job meant long, grueling hours, often alone in the deep, secluded forests of the Pacific Northwest. The way his logging crew worked, he was paid based on the number of trees he cut down rather than the hours he worked, so he would often push himself to work 16 to 20-hour days to finish jobs as quickly as possible. After he and his coworker finished their part, the rest of the crew would come in to clear the felled trees and transport them to the mill. While he spent about half of his time working alone, the other half was spent with his friend Griffin, another tree saw operator. They used radios to communicate, especially when they worked on opposite ends of the same job site. A number of years ago, my friend's dad and Griffin were assigned to a remote job site high up on a mountain. It took the company over 3 weeks just to clear a road wide enough for their trucks and equipment to make it to the site. By the time they began work, they were positioned in an extremely desolate part of the mountain. They were already 10 days in, making good progress, when they started hearing strange chatter over their radios. At first the voices were muffled, just faint, static-laden murmurs that didn't make sense. They tried switching channels, but no matter what they did, the chatter followed them. Anyone who's used a standard radio knows how strange that is. It should be impossible for anyone to follow you when you're switching channels. As they progressed farther up the mountain, the voices became more distinct. They couldn't hear full conversations, but based on what they could hear, they both agreed that the tone of the conversation fragments felt off. My friend's dad said it sounded almost casual at times, but the content was unintelligible. They also started finding strange signs that people had been there before them. Random containers, footprints in the dirt, and small makeshift campsites. Like I said before, they were in a place so remote it was practically inaccessible, so these discoveries were deeply unsettling. No one should have been up there. One day, Griffin came across a tent hidden just off a trail and called my friend's dad over. They decided to investigate. Inside, they found a single sleeping bag and a duffel bag filled with the most disturbing things imaginable. Multiple pairs of children's underwear, duct tape, rope, and crude sketches of children being molested. There were even photos of a fresh apple indicating whoever owned it had been there recently. Griffin wanted to pack up and leave immediately. My friend's dad, ever the workaholic, insisted they finish the job. They agreed to limit radio communication to emergencies only and decided to keep working. That night, they sat in the camper, unable to shake the dread that hung over them. The radio crackled to life again, and this time, they could make out snippets of a conversation between two men. They were talking about mundane things, collecting water and firewood, but the realization that these men were likely connected to the tent freaked my friend's dad out. Griffin wasn't as fazed, but my friend's dad was losing it. The next night, my friend's dad decided to confront them. When he heard the men talking about gathering bush for a fire, he grabbed the radio and demanded to know who they were and what they were doing there. The radio went silent immediately, and the men didn't respond. That silence was almost more unnerving than the chatter. Griffin was upset that my friend's dad had announced their presence, and the two of them got into a brief argument before deciding they'd escalate the situation the next day. Around midnight, Griffin shook my friend's dad awake, whispering that someone was outside the camper. The first thing he noticed was the soft sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. Heart pounding, he fumbled for his gun, only to realize it wasn't loaded. He had no idea where his ammunition was. Griffin was unarmed, and the idea of calling the police was laughable given their location. They both sat frozen as they heard the camper door handle jiggle. The door creaked open, but didn't fully swing inward. Their camper was high off the ground, and there was no ladder or stool to climb up. Then came the scratching. Long, deliberate scratches along the outside of the door. 4 agonizing minutes passed. Finally, my friend's dad nodded at Griffin, signaling he was going to check it out. He moved quietly toward the door, gripping a flashlight in his shaking hand. Just as he reached the door, it burst open, and he was struck across the face with a knife. His pain was blinding. He fell out of the camper, hitting the ground hard. Before he could recover, a man was on top of him, pressing the knife against his neck. Another man appeared, kicking him repeatedly in the head. Griffin, without hesitation, leapt out of the camper and tackled the man with a knife. The second man bolted into the darkness, and the one Griffin had tackled scrambled to his feet and followed. They disappeared into the forest. Griffin helped my dad's friend back into the truck, and they drove 2 hours to the nearest hospital. It was bad. His face was a bloody mess, and there was a cut across his eye so severe it permanently damaged his vision. They reported the attack to the police, but nothing came of it. 2 weeks later, as the rest of the logging crew finished the job, one of their coworkers was found bound, gagged, raped, and murdered in a ditch. No arrests were ever made. To this day, my friend's dad struggles with PTSD. His right eye, with its disfigured pupil, constantly reminds him of that night. I'm sure he hasn't had a full night of restful sleep since. I've been terrified of deep woods for a long time now, mostly because of my friend's dad's experience. I haven't heard from my friend or his dad in years now, so I can only hope he's doing all right. This happened last summer. I was 20 years old. My name is Kevin. My friend James comes from a very wealthy family. His dad is like an IP lawyer who contracts with the US government or something. They've got a bunch of properties all over the country, and a handful of international ones too. That's the kind of wealth I'm talking about. One of their houses is on a relatively large but overall pretty secluded lake. The lake itself isn't so big that you can't see the houses on the other side of it, but it would be a workout and a half swimming across the whole thing. James' parents were never around, so he pretty much had unlimited access to that house, and he often invited friends over, with permission of course. There's something about being out on the lake that makes you feel invincible. It's a different feeling than the beach for sure. I'm not really sure how to explain it, but there's more of an exclusive vibe to it. Hopefully I can be successful enough to afford one day. Like I said, the lake itself is pretty secluded. Big fancy houses line the perimeter, but most of them would usually sit dark and empty. A lot of them were vacation homes for people who barely even use them. It's honestly kind of a shame thinking about it. There are upsides to that though. James would throw the craziest parties there because there were usually no neighbors to call the police. This night was different though. It was just the two of us, having a more chill night. I won't get into it, but I had just broken up with my girlfriend of 3 years and I was in dire need of some bro time. We were having a few beers out on the dock when I noticed a light flicking across the lake. I can't remember exactly what time it was. At first, I thought it was just the sun perfectly reflecting off something into my eye, but even when I moved my head to the side, I could still see it. It was flashing like someone was turning a light on and off repeatedly. I told James, and the two of us became fixed on it, trying to figure out what it could be. At some point, we realized the flashing wasn't random. It was following a pattern. 3 short bursts, followed by 3 longer ones, followed by 3 short ones. I guess I'm dumb for not knowing this, but James snapped his fingers and said it was Morse code. I looked at him like he was crazy, and asked him when in the world he had learned Morse code. He told me he didn't actually know it, but he knew what 3 short, 3 long, 3 short meant. SOS. I called BS and pulled out my phone, but to my surprise, he was actually right. Like I said, maybe I'm dumb for not knowing that, but I'm not really one for obscure knowledge anyway. The flashing continued for another minute or so, following that same pattern, before stopping abruptly. The two of us had just been staring at it the whole time. I really didn't know what to think. It could have been a joke, but there was always that chance that someone was actually in trouble. James immediately suggested calling the cops, but I reminded him that we'd been drinking and we weren't legal yet. I was honestly fighting a DUI charge at the time, so the last thing I needed was another run-in with the police. He wasn't thrilled about that answer, and I could tell he was torn about the situation. The two of us couldn't really think of a rational explanation besides a kidnapping or something along those lines. We thought it might have been someone who had fallen and needed help, but that didn't make any sense because they probably would have just called the police. We've always been those adventurous, delinquent type guys, so we decided it was worth checking out ourselves. If it turned out to be serious, we'd call the police then. We went back inside. James' brother had a bunch of switchblades lying around his room. He was kind of a weird kid. So we grabbed a few of them just for peace of mind. James said he was good to drive, and that we should drive around the lake to that house, but I told him I really wasn't comfortable with that, for obvious reasons. He joked about my situation, and I laughed it off. If we weren't driving, there was only really one other option. The two of us walked back out to the yard, and dragged James' dad's kayak into the water. We were laughing at first, enjoying the adventure of it all, but the further out we got onto the lake, the quieter we got. I think both of us realized how dumb of an idea it was, but neither of us wanted to be the one to spoil the fun. The sun had almost fully set at that point, and it was getting harder to see. It wasn't pitch black or anything. We had light from some of the lake houses to guide us, but it was still a bit unsettling. As we got closer, the house came into view. It was big like the others, but it was obviously not maintained very well. For starters, the dock was half collapsed, literally. Half of it was just sunken into the water. The flashing had also stopped, which was kind of a bad sign too. We had planned on just tying the kayak to the dock, but we obviously couldn't do that anymore given how unstable it looked. Luckily, the yard wasn't too high up above the water, so we beached the kayak on the yard instead, careful not to slip on the rocks. I felt the adrenaline rush start coming on. I could tell James was feeling the same thing. We looked up toward the house. The light had been coming from the second floor, that much we knew. James was freaking out at that point, and insisted that we just leave and call the police. I told him we'd have to kayak all the way back to his house to even do that, as there was no service on the lake and that we need to connect to Wi-Fi. I reminded him that we had explored 1 million abandoned buildings before, and this wasn't too different. He wasn't thrilled with that logic, but agreed anyway. Believe me, I know how dumb this was. Everyone I talk to about this shares that same opinion, but I've never been one to make good decisions, and neither is James. We didn't walk to the front door. That would have been suicide. Instead, we crept around the house until we found a window that was unlocked. The two of us silently slipped inside. The house was empty. Not just abandoned, but empty. Like stripped. There was no furniture and no junk in there either. To be frank, there was no signs that anyone had ever even lived there. The floors and walls were completely bare. We moved cautiously through the rooms, looking for the stairs. There was no one in sight, and all the rooms were just as empty as the first one had been. We finally found the stairs and slowly made our way up. I had made a mental note of where the window was, and we slowly walked down one of the hallways until we got to what I guessed was the room the light had been coming from. I pressed my ear against the door and heard nothing. I glanced over at James. He nodded, and I carefully pushed the door open. The room was empty, with the exception of one thing by the window. I tiptoed over to it and realized what it was. It was one of those old projectors, and it was facing the window. Alarm bells immediately started going off in my head. This was a trap. Someone had set this up deliberately. James must have realized the same thing, because I just heard him start sprinting back the way we had came, not even trying to be quiet. I turned without another thought and followed him. As we were running down the stairs, I heard a door, presumably a closet door, swing open from the room I had just been in, followed by rapid thumping sounds. We bolted down the stairs and back through the house to that first window. James jumped through and I was next. As I was climbing through, I heard those footsteps from behind me again, bounding down the stairs. I didn't even look. I just made it through the window and ran to catch up with James, who was already down by the lake's edge. As I was running to catch up to him, I heard him curse, and I quickly realized why. The kayak was gone. I turned, and from the side of the house, there was a person running toward us. I could barely process what I was seeing. He was fast. I couldn't get a good look at him, but he was big, definitely an adult. I pulled out my switchblade, ready to defend myself. I expected James to do the same, but instead, he turned and jumped straight into the lake. Sneakers, hoodie, everything. I didn't even think, I just followed. The water was freezing, but I didn't care. I swam as fast as I could, trying to fight the burning sensation in my arms and legs. We swam toward the light from James' house, which looked like it was miles away. The swim felt endless, but on pure adrenaline, we made it. By the time we dragged ourselves onto James' dock, I thought I had hypothermia. I don't think I've ever been that cold in my life. We ran straight inside, locked every door, and called the police. It took them almost an hour to show up. It was honestly kind of outrageous. When they finally did, they went straight across the lake to investigate. They were over there for a while, but when they came back, they told us exactly what I expected to hear, that there was no one. They confirmed this house had been abandoned for years. No signs of recent occupancy, no footprints, no gear, no personal belongings, nothing. Just an empty house. They weren't happy with us. They gave us the whole "why didn't you call first" speech. James's parents were even more pissed when they found out. Let's just say I wasn't invited back to the lake house after that. James told me his parents were threatening to sue the town for allowing something like that to happen, and the police for refusing to investigate further. As for me, I still don't know what happened that night. I don't know who was in that house, or why they set that trap, or what they planned to do if we hadn't run. I don't think I want to. Most of my friends agree that it was a trap, and think that whoever was planning the whole thing got cold feet until the last minute. I really don't want to think about what would have happened if they had gone through with whatever they were planning on doing. When I moved into my new place, I was just looking for a fresh start. I won't get into the details, but let's just say I had a bad situation with an ex that made staying in my old city impossible. I ran into some money early in life and made some bad decisions about the kind of women I surrounded myself with. Lesson learned. The neighborhood I moved to is really nice. Low crime, quiet, mostly families. The houses here are really spaced out, which was partially what drew me there. But for some reason, the property next to mine is much closer in proximity than most of the other properties are to each other. And by the way, that house next door is huge. When I first saw it, I thought I could easily fit a family of 10. That's honestly what I assumed at first, that a big family lived there, grandparents and everything. But I could not have been more wrong. Even though I try to be low-key, I wasn't going to be a rude neighbor. I took it upon myself to introduce myself to everyone in the neighborhood. For whatever reason, I decided to introduce myself to my next-door neighbors last. I couldn't tell you why. Everyone else I met seemed really sweet and genuine. I'd say 90% of them were parents of young children. And yes, they were all slightly intimidating, purely based on how successful they seemed to be. I wasn't too sure how a younger guy like myself would easily blend into a community like that, but that was more of a personal concern. When I got around to meeting my next-door neighbor, my social battery was mostly drained from having spent the day making small talk with strangers. I knew if I just went back home, I was never going to be as motivated to meet them, so I just sucked it up and walked up their driveway. I had gotten accustomed to being greeted by someone middle-aged, so when a young-looking dude in a mullet opened the door, I was a little taken aback. Hell, he looked even younger than me, which was definitely a shock. I recovered quickly and went ahead with my new-to-the-neighborhood spiel. As I went on, he flashed me this massive smile and actually cut me off before I could even finish talking. He said something along the lines of, "Oh wow, someone who was born in my decade, what a nice surprise." I laughed and told him the same thing, venting to him about how out of place I felt as a single guy in his late 20s among so many families with kids. He told me not to worry about that and that most of the people who lived here kept to themselves, which was kind of a relief for me. He introduced himself as Damon and told me I should come by for a drink sometime. I shrugged my shoulders and said, hell, why not right now? To which I expected him to laugh and invite me in. Instead though, he looked over his shoulder like he was scanning his living room, and then he turned back to me, saying he wished he could but he was busy working. I asked him what he did for work, because it just seems like a normal follow-up question to what he said, and he dropped his smile a bit. After a weird stare, he laughed and just said finance, but didn't elaborate any more than that, which I thought was a bit strange. I told him fair enough and asked if he had any roommates. To my surprise, he told me he lived there alone, which was absolutely insane to me given how big the house was. We chit-chatted for a few more minutes, and he gave me his number before going back inside. I was excited that someone my age lived here, especially because he seemed like a really chill guy, but I couldn't get over how odd it was for someone like that to live all alone. And yeah, I know I was essentially doing the same thing, but you have to keep in mind my house wasn't even half the size of his. Anyway, I went back home and got on with my life. That was about 6 months ago. For a few weeks after that, nothing eventful really happened. I texted Damon a few days after he gave me his number to try and set something up, but he'd always complain about how busy he was and how sorry he was that we couldn't hang out. Eventually, I gave up with him. Not in a hostile way, just in a you do you kind of way. I'm definitely not the type of person to bend over backwards for someone who seems disinterested. I never saw anyone coming or going from Damon's place. No visitors, no parties, no girls, nothing. He never even got takeout delivered, which was strange to me because his car was always in the driveway. I genuinely didn't know what he ate because I literally never saw him leave the house. The guy lived like a ghost. I work from home, and the office in my house is on the 3rd floor, which overlooks Damon's property, if you're wondering how I knew so much about his living habits. I know it sounds obsessive and a little creepy, but his house was also just a glance away from my monitor, so I couldn't help but look over from time to time. One night, it was a Wednesday night, I remember that distinctly. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of loud music. I sleep with my windows open, so that's probably how I woke up so easily. At first, I thought I was imagining it, or it was part of a really vivid dream I was having, but I was wrong. I got out of bed and peeked out my window, and there they were, 7 or so cars lined up in Damon's driveway. There was no mistaking it, he was having a party. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not the type to complain about some noise. I've been to my fair share of house parties, but it was the middle of the week, and the volume was insane. I figured I'd just go over, knock, and ask him to turn it down. I threw on a hoodie and walked over. It was a full-blown party, that much was clear from outside. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I pulled out my phone to text Damon, but I decided against it, knowing he'd probably ignore me and give me some BS excuse the following morning. I knocked on the door again, harder this time. Still nothing. I reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked, but to my surprise, the door swung open. Inside, the first thing I saw was a pile of shoes in the foyer, at least 10 pairs, but there was something off. There was literally no one in there. I moved further in, expecting to see people in the living room, maybe the kitchen, but it was completely empty. There weren't even any drinks left out. I could hear people over the music that was playing in the background though, which I didn't understand. But then I really listened to it, and everything hit me all at once. It wasn't even music really. It was a recording, a literal recording of people laughing, yelling, clinking glasses. The whole party was fake, all of it. But that didn't make sense to me. It still didn't explain the shoes or the cars. There were people in that house, that much was certain. I should have turned around right then, but I needed to know what was going on. I moved discreetly around the house until I saw a door that was slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open and it led down to the basement. I'm not sure how I knew, but something told me what I was looking for was downstairs. It was dark down those stairs with the exception of a very faint light coming from somewhere I couldn't see. There was no reason to go down there, I knew that, but I did it anyway. I got to the bottom of the stairs and looked around. The light was coming from another door somewhere deeper in the basement. I crept towards it, and as I got closer, I started to pick up on another noise I hadn't been able to hear earlier over the music. It sounded almost mechanical. It was this heavy, rhythmic grinding, like heavy machinery or a buzzsaw or something. I got a little closer, close enough to see through the crack. There were 3 people standing in there, looking across the room at something that was out of view. They were all older-looking guys, significantly older than Damon. They were wearing heavy-duty work clothes and had on these protective goggles and thick rubber gloves. I also realized they were wearing what looked like work boots, even though I had seen all those other shoes upstairs. Under different circumstances, I would have assumed that they were construction workers. I really wanted to see what they were looking at, but it was too far out of view. After a few seconds of me just standing there, I started to pick up on this awful bleach smell, or some kind of cleaning solution. That's what did it for me. I started to feel this awful pit in my stomach, like my life was in danger. I can't explain it. I turned to leave, trying to be as quiet as possible. As I was finding my way back to the stairs, the light from behind me suddenly dimmed, like someone had shut the door behind me. I didn't actually hear the door over the music, but I felt it. I sprinted up the stairs as fast as I could. I ran through the house and burst out the front door. I didn't run directly to my house. I jumped my own fence and made it to the backyard. I slipped in through my side door, locking it behind me. My chest was pounding, but under no circumstances could I let Damon or any of those other guys know it was me who had been snooping around. I gathered myself and went up to my office, making sure all the lights up there were off. I crouched down below the window and peeked over at Damon's house. There was no one there. But then, a few minutes later, the front door flew open and like 8 guys poured out, scanning the yard, the driveway, the street, but Damon wasn't with them. I could tell because everyone looked older, like those first guys I had seen. A few of them looked like they were arguing about something, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. One of the men actually shoved one of the other ones, and I thought they were about to start fighting in the street, but they didn't. Eventually, they all went back inside, and the music stopped soon after that. I stood at the window, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I even say? The music wasn't playing anymore, and there was no real crime I could actually report. The thing I couldn't understand was how none of my other neighbors had a problem with the loud music, especially since most of them had children. I figured if they hadn't been able to hear it and I called the police, Damon would know it was me. And the shoes, I had no idea what that was about either. The people I had seen were all wearing boots. So did they bring extra pairs of shoes just to leave in the foyer? I had too many questions and I didn't know what to do, so I just went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and looked out my bedroom window. Every single car was gone, including Damon's. I went upstairs to try and get some work done, but I couldn't concentrate and found myself looking over at Damon's house every 5 seconds. After a few hours of his car not being there, I decided to go for a walk, partly to clear my head, but mostly to take some low-key glances through his windows. Nothing though. Days passed and Damon still didn't return, or his car didn't at least. I was baffled with every passing day. I still couldn't figure out how my other neighbors had been able to sleep through all the noises that night, so I just straight up asked them. I went to a few houses and asked them if they had heard the party he had a few nights ago. No one knew what I was talking about, even after I told them which house it was coming from and how late it was. I thought I was going crazy. That was a few months ago now. The crazy thing is Damon still hasn't returned, and it's clear no one is maintaining his house, as the grass is starting to get really long, and there's an untouched pile of packages leaning against his front door. I don't know what to make of this. It could be nothing, but I feel like no one would go to such lengths to disguise what they were doing with a fake party, unless it was something illegal. But would people going to such lengths really forget something as important as locking the front door? Maybe that's what those guys had been arguing about. I really have no idea, and the fact that none of my other neighbors seemed bothered by it makes me think I'm involved in some huge conspiracy or something. I know I'm just being paranoid, but I just have so many unanswered questions. When Damon returns, if he ever does, I'm debating whether or not I should just go and straight up ask him. My name is Evan. I'm 28 years old. After my divorce, I moved to a small town named Chatham in Alabama. Apart from my parents' house, I didn't really have anywhere else to go, so I came to live in my grandfather's old house. He passed away a few years ago and left the place to us. It's about 10 minutes outside town, sitting on 10 acres surrounded by woods. It's real quiet out there. I thought I'd enjoy that. The house is old, wood floors that creak, doors that stick, the kind of place that always feels a little cold no matter how high the thermostat is. But it was free, and I didn't have a better option. The first few nights were normal. I unpacked and cleaned. I spent the evening sitting on the porch with a beer. It was peaceful. No traffic, just the wind through the trees and the occasional owl. But then the noises started. The first time I heard it was on the 7th night. I had just gotten into bed around midnight. I was almost asleep when I heard whistling outside. It wasn't a song I recognized, just a slow, broken tune, off-key. It sounded like someone walking through the woods behind the house, whistling as they went. It creeped me out, but I figured it was some hunter or drunk neighbor. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same tune, but this time it sounded closer. I got out of bed and turned on the porch light, but I didn't see anyone. I went outside with a flashlight and checked around the yard. Nothing. No tracks, no sounds of someone running off, just the whistling, fading deeper into the woods. I tried to ignore it. For a couple of nights, I just stayed in bed and tried to sleep through it, but every time, the whistling would start around 1:17 a.m. I know that sounds like a random number, but I swear it was always around 1:15 or 1:19, somewhere there. It was like clockwork. I started thinking maybe someone was messing with me on purpose, someone who knew I was out there alone. I called the sheriff's office a few days later. An old deputy, who I'll call Deputy H, came out. He'd been in the job a long time. When I told him what was happening, he got real quiet. He said word for word, "Your granddaddy used to call us about the same thing. Said someone was whistling around the property late at night, always in the spring. We never found anything. I figured he was just getting old, but now you're hearing it too." That shook me. I had no idea my grandfather dealt with this. Deputy H told me to keep the doors locked and stay inside after dark. I started doing that. Not like I wasn't already. I double-checked every window. One night I even put chairs under the doorknobs, but the whistling kept coming. Closer every night. One night I heard it behind the shed. It was louder than usual, like the person was standing right outside. I grabbed my flashlight and looked through the blinds. I didn't see anyone, but I didn't dare go outside. The next night, I heard it from the front porch, right by the door. 3 long whistles, then silence. The night after that, it came from under the floorboards, I swear to God. It was like someone was in the crawl space, whistling up through the vents. I didn't sleep at all that night. I started digging through the attic the next day, trying to find anything my grandfather left behind. I found a box of his journals. He wrote about the whistling. He said it happened every spring for over 10 years. He didn't know who it was, but he thought it was someone watching the house. He said he used to sit up with a rifle by the front door just in case. He said it only ever happened when he lived alone, after my grandmother died. I called Deputy H again. He came by and read the journal, and he looked nervous. He told me to be careful. He said, "Don't open the door if you don't know who it is." That night, I stayed up. I sat on the couch with a shotgun across my lap, a shotgun I barely knew how to load. I waited. At 1:17 a.m., the whistling started again, but this time, it didn't come from outside. It came from the hallway, inside the house. I froze. The hallway light was off. I could hear the whistling moving closer, step by step. I stood up, aimed the shotgun, and shouted, "Who's there?" The whistling stopped. I flipped the hallway light on. Nothing was there. No one. I didn't sleep again after that. It was 2 nights since then, and I hadn't heard it again. I was getting sick. I didn't know who this person was. I didn't know why they picked me or my grandfather, but it was real, and I knew it was. I don't believe in hallucinations to that degree, nor do I believe in anything paranormal. This was a real person. After that night, things went quiet for 2 days. No sounds, no movement, no sign of anything. I thought maybe it was finally over. On the 3rd night, I went to bed just after midnight. I didn't stay up this time. I left the hallway light on just in case. At exactly 1:17 a.m., I woke up to a new sound. Not whistling, knocking. Slow, paced-out knocks. 3 of them. They were coming from inside the house, from the back door. Then silence. I didn't move. I stayed in bed, listening. A minute later, I heard a new sound. A creak from the floorboard in the hallway. Then another. Someone was walking. The hallway light went out. I grabbed my shotgun, heart pounding, and stepped out of the bedroom. The hallway was dark, but at the end of it, I saw something. A person, wearing black clothes, pale face. They were standing perfectly still, just watching me. I raised the shotgun, but my hands were shaking. I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry. I raised the shotgun, but my hands were shaking. I screamed, "Don't move," with my shaky voice. I saw in the dark the person slowly start lifting their leg and turning as if they were about to run. I screamed, "Stop," and at that moment they darted out of the hallway, out of my line of sight. I heard their surprisingly heavy footsteps stomping out the front door into the dark. I ran outside and fired a shot, not into the air, but straight ahead into the darkness, low-key hoping I'd hit him in the dark. I screamed, "Don't come back." The shot hurt my ears, ricocheting off the walls of the house and the deck. I locked up the house, got to my truck, and drove into town. I slept in my truck that night. The next morning, Deputy H drove out there, and the front door to the house was unlocked again. That confirmed whoever that person was had a key to my grandfather's house. Nothing was broken or missing, but Deputy H recommended I change the locks, and he also off the record suggested I move out of that old place, because someone out in those woods hasn't taken kindly to either my grandfather or myself being in that house. I drove out to the local home improvement store and switched the locks that day, that same hour. After that, I left that house to go to my parents' house out of state for a while. I left it to my dad to eventually sell that house. Anything of sentimental value we took out, and the rest was just left in there or sold. My father, of course, left out the fact that there's some creep who's been stalking the house for apparently decades now. How they potentially got a key, who they were, why my grandfather never said anything, I don't know. It all disturbs me deeply. I personally think it was some disturbed creep living in a nearby house. I eventually moved to a more urban area. This experience left me honestly too unsettled to live in a remote location. What you're about to hear is an experience that nearly made me lose my mind. It's still something that I think about quite often, if I'm being honest, but I've been able to recover a bit in the months since it's happened. The whole story is pretty quick, so I'll get right into it. I'm a single guy in my mid-30s. I live alone with no pets in a small one-story house. The house is really modest. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, kitchen, dining room, and a tiny garage. That's it. Life is fantastic. Because of my profession, I can work on my own time and don't have to answer to anyone, whether that be a girlfriend, a parent, or an employer. Freedom has always been an imperative part of my life, so I've done my best to maximize it wherever possible. I know a lot of people are different, and a lot of people might actually judge me for my quote, immature lifestyle, but everyone has different priorities and preferences, so as long as no one judges me, I won't judge them. The excess freedom is definitely tethered to its own set of drawbacks though. I've developed some bad habits that I'm sure some people would frown upon. One of them is my sleep schedule, which is god-awful. For some reason, I'm most productive at late hours of the night, so I often find myself staying up until dawn and sleeping into the afternoon. It's just how my body functions, and until I'm absolutely forced to, I don't see a reason to change anything. I was up really late one night. I'm talking past 3 a.m. late. I was sitting at my desk, getting some work done on my computer. I was in the zone, not even listening to music. Imagine yourself at peak hours. That's the kind of groove I was in. The room was dead silent, and I was alone with my thoughts, the sound of my keyboard, and my work. And then, bam, out of nowhere, the silence was interrupted by the sound of footsteps pounding down the hallway towards my bedroom, followed by 3 or 4 bangs on the bedroom door. Like deafening bangs, the type of bangs you'd expect the police trying to barge into a drug den would make. I shot up from my chair so fast I banged my knee on the desk and knocked my monitor over. I was just so shocked, it caught me completely off guard. Just imagine being in your own house at 3 a.m., alone, and complete silence just gets interrupted by banging on your door. It was, and still is, the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. Standing up was a pure reaction. I was completely frozen after that. I had my eyes fixated on the door, dreading the moment I knew was coming. The door bursting open and someone barging into my room. Me having to fight a complete stranger in pitch black darkness. But it never came. I didn't hear anything else, not even the sounds of footsteps retreating from the door. It was like I had imagined it, but I was 100% positive I hadn't. I don't know how long I stood there, but I physically could not force myself to move. It was like sleep paralysis, except I hadn't been dreaming. And then, finally, I heard the sounds of footsteps quickly walking back down the hall. So someone had been there. I don't know why, but hearing those footsteps again unlocked my brain. Without thinking, I grabbed an empty beer bottle off my desk, ran to the door, and started chasing after whoever had broken into my home. I didn't even try to be quiet. I screamed at the top of my lungs like a lunatic, hoping that would give me the extra adrenaline I needed. I ran through the entire house, screaming, but I never found anyone. My house isn't that big. There aren't many places someone could hide, but even after checking every room, there was no one there. All the doors and windows were locked too, which was even more confusing. My bout of confidence was completely drained after that, and I felt fear start flooding back in. I sprinted back to my room, locked the door, and called the police. In the time it took the police to arrive, I listened to my surroundings in complete silence, but never heard anything. When the police finally showed up, we searched the house together, but found nothing. One of the officers tried to convince me that whoever had been there had left, but I insisted that everything had been locked up. He told me I had probably overlooked something, and it took everything in me not to curse him out right there. I know for a fact that nothing had been unlocked, but that didn't explain how that person had gotten into and out of my house. Unless I had imagined it, but I know I didn't. For the next week, I was a psychological mess. My brain refused to accept that I had imagined something so vivid, and I couldn't conceive of a possible way that that person had gotten into and out of my house. I'm much better now, but there was a time where I had trouble sleeping, eating, working, everything. Even now, the only explanation I can think of is that I somehow didn't notice an unlocked window or door in my house. Still though, why anyone would crash through my house just to run away is a complete mystery to me. I work for a property preservation company. Basically, we handle foreclosed homes, securing them, cleaning them out, winterizing them, sometimes even boarding them up if there's been vandalism. It's not glamorous work, but it pays well, and for the most part, it's quiet. You spend a lot of time alone in houses that used to belong to people who are long gone. Sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's just boring, but every once in a while, you get a house that feels unsettling. This happened in 2020, when I was assigned to clear out a property in a rural part of upstate New York. It was one of those dying places, only one gas station, half the businesses shuttered, roads cracked and overgrown. The house itself was a small, one-story place off a dirt road, surrounded by overgrown brush and woods on 3 sides. No other homes nearby, just trees and silence. According to the file, the house had been foreclosed after the owner, an elderly woman, passed away, and no heirs had stepped forward to claim the estate. The utilities had been shut off for over a year. Our job was to catalog any remaining property, empty it out, and secure it for winter. I drove up on a Monday morning around 9 a.m. with a small box truck and all my gear. From the outside, the house looked intact. Windows closed, door locked, roof fine, just a lot of weeds and vines climbing up the porch. I had to shove the front door open because it had swollen in the frame, but once inside, everything looked pretty standard. It was dusty, stale air and faded furniture. Then my work phone rang. It startled me because I had no signal out there. I'd already checked and noticed I had no bars, but the phone buzzed anyway. There was no number on the caller ID, it just said unknown caller. I answered, and there was nothing, just a low crackling sound, like static. I said hello twice, then hung up, chalked it up to a glitch. I got to work. I always start with photos, documenting every room, every item. The living room was cluttered with old furniture, lace curtains, some framed paintings. It reminded me of my grandma's house. Heavy furniture, doilies, porcelain figures. The hallway had a smell. Not rot, more like mildew and dust, and something faintly metallic. There were 3 bedrooms. One had been stripped bare except for a sagging mattress on the floor. Another was clearly a sewing room, with thread spools everywhere and a dusty machine on the desk. I took a closer look, and there was a corkboard filled with old newspaper clippings, and they were mostly obituaries. Dozens of them, all clipped out with scissors and pinned carefully to the board. No names I recognized, all local. I moved on. In the master bedroom, there was a rotary phone on the nightstand. I remember stopping and staring at it for a second because I hadn't seen one in years. It was off-white, yellowed with age, with a long coiled cord. The kind of phone that would never ring again because the line had been cut long ago. I moved on to the bathroom. That's when my phone rang again. It said unknown caller again. This time, I hesitated. I picked it up, stepped out into the hallway, and answered. Again, nothing. But this time, after about 5 seconds, I heard a whisper. Very soft, so quiet I could barely make it out. It said, "Don't answer the phone in the bedroom." Then the line went dead. I stood there, frozen, heart pounding. The house was dead silent. I checked the windows, all closed. Nobody was outside, and there was no sign of forced entry. My first thought was that someone had pranked me. It's what anyone would think. Maybe one of the other crew guys was messing with me, but no one else knew I was there that early, and again, I had no signal. I checked my phone. 1 bar, then nothing, like it flickered in and out of existence. I tried calling my supervisor, but the call failed. I decided to finish the job quickly. I started boxing up loose items in the living room, books, figurines, dusty glassware, but the whole time, I felt off, like I was being watched. I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting to see someone standing down there. Then the phone rang a 3rd time. But not my phone, the rotary phone in the bedroom. I heard it from across the house, a shrill, mechanical ring that echoed through the rooms. That phone should have been dead. The line was disconnected, no dial tone and no service, but yet it rang, like an old-fashioned bell. I walked slowly down the hallway toward the bedroom, phone still in my hand. It rang again and again. I stepped into the doorway. The phone sat on the nightstand, the receiver trembling slightly with each ring. There was no chance I was picking up that phone. The rings eventually stopped. I backed out of the room. I wanted to leave, but part of my job was securing the property, and I still had to check the basement. I almost said screw it, but something made me keep going. Maybe it was pride. Maybe I just didn't want to admit how scared I was. The basement door was in the kitchen. I opened it slowly. The stairs creaked as I stepped down, flashlight in hand. I smelled mold and something like rust. There were shelves along the wall, filled with old paint cans and some broken furniture. In the back corner, there was a small table. On it, a cordless phone, a newer model. It was gray plastic and covered in dust, and next to it, a stack of yellowed notebooks. I picked one up and flipped through it. Each page had a name and a date and a short sentence. Lena H., July 3rd, 2019. Rang once, didn't answer. Carl M., September 12th, 2019. Picked up, warned him. It was more like this, dozens of entries. I dropped the notebook, and my heart felt like it completely dropped out of my body as I looked around the basement, fearing I wasn't alone down there, and that someone was watching me from any corner in the darkness. I rushed back up the stairs, looking behind me the whole time, heart in my throat. I didn't finish the job. I drove straight back to the office and turned in my report. I didn't tell them everything. I just said the property was unsafe and possibly had squatters or interference. They reassigned the job to another crew. 2 days later, I got a text from one of the other guys, Mark. He'd gone out there that morning to finish the job. I hadn't told him specifically what happened. His message said, "The phone in the bedroom with no service rang while I was in there. What the hell?" I called his work cell phone immediately, and he told me he didn't answer the phone in the house because he was too freaked out. The next day, Mark apparently quit without notice and never returned to work. He's not dead or anything. I admittedly looked him up on Facebook eventually, and he posted stuff since then, but I never spoke to him again. I don't know what else he saw in the house, but it must have been something bad enough for him to want to distance himself from this job. My boss did call the police to report the potential squatters after Mark quit, but they found nobody inside of the house. Everything about that house, from its location to its eerie, dilapidated interior, to the phone calls to my cell phone, and that voice on that line, and that damn house phone ringing. It's like I found myself in a legitimate horror movie. I swear it had to be one of two things: an elaborate sick prank, or an equally elaborate trap. When I was 10 years old, my family moved into a bigger house because my mom had just gotten remarried and we needed more space. The house was nice, newer than the one we lived in before, and it was in a quiet neighborhood with a lot of trees. I thought I would be happy there. At first, everything seemed normal, but then little things started happening that made me feel like the house wasn't right. My bedroom was at the end of the hall. It had 2 big windows that faced the backyard and a closet that was deeper than the one I had before. I liked it, until the first night I slept there. I woke up around midnight because I heard something moving in the closet. It wasn't loud, just soft shuffling like clothes being brushed against. I stared at the closet and told myself it was just the house settling. I know it sounds cliche, but most people, even as children, would assume small sounds coming from here and there in a house are just typical house noises that you hear every day. But then I saw the door move. It didn't swing open, but it shivered like someone had lightly pressed on it from the inside. I wanted to run to my mom's room, but I was frozen. I stayed that way until I fell back asleep, still staring at the closet. The next morning, the closet door was cracked open just a little, even though I had shut it tight. I asked my mom if she had gone in there, and she said no. She said maybe the air vents pushed it, but I knew it wasn't the air vents. The nights after that got worse. I started hearing tapping on the window glass. At first, I thought it was tree branches, but when I looked, there were no branches near the window. The tapping would go on for minutes, and when I pulled the blanket over my head, it would stop. I tried to ignore it until one night I finally peeked out. I saw a pale hand pressed against the window. It was on the outside, but the window was on the second floor, way too high for anyone to reach without a ladder. The hand stayed there for a long time, just pressed, without moving. Then it slid down slowly and disappeared. I didn't sleep at all that night. I told my mom, and she started cracking up laughing when I told her. She didn't believe me for a second. When she saw that I wasn't just saying it as a prank or a joke, she leaned more into trying to convince me that I was probably in a half-asleep state and seeing things from my dream, but I knew that was a load of horseshit. My stepdad didn't believe me either. He said I was making it up for attention, and he also got a laugh out of it. But I started noticing he kept the hallway light on at night, so maybe he didn't feel as safe as he pretended. A month later, my little brother, who was 4, started talking about the White Lady. He would say she came into his room and sat on his bed. My mom thought it was just his imagination, but one night I heard him screaming. I ran in and saw him curled up under his blanket crying. When he finally calmed down, he said the White Lady had been standing by his door, just staring at him. He said her eyes were all black. I believed him because of what I had seen at my window. I started sleeping with the blanket over my head every night, but that didn't stop the dreams. I began to dream of the White Lady too. She would stand in the corner of my room and whisper my name. Her voice was dry, like leaves rubbing together. Sometimes I would wake up and still hear it, faint but definitely real. One night I woke up and saw her standing at the foot of my bed. She was taller than anyone I had ever seen. Her head almost touched the ceiling. She wore a long white dress that moved even though the air was still. Her hair was black and stringy, and her face was pale like chalk. Her eyes were like empty black holes. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I shut my eyes, and when I opened them again, she was gone, but my closet door was wide open. After that, I couldn't go in my closet anymore. I begged my mom to let me sleep in her room, but she said I need to learn how to be brave. I think she didn't want to admit she was scared too. The worst night came during a storm, heavy rain and loud wind. I woke up to the sound of my window creaking. When I looked, the window was slowly sliding open, even though it was locked. I could see the lock turning by itself. The window opened all the way, and I saw the White Lady climb in. She didn't move like a person. She floated. Her feet never touched the floor. She drifted toward my bed and leaned down until her face was right in front of mine. I felt her cold breath on my skin. She whispered my name again, and this time I screamed as loud as I could. My mom and stepdad came running in, but when they turned on the light, the window was closed and locked, and no one else was there. They yelled at me for scaring everyone, but I could see in their faces that they were worried. The weird thing about that part of the story is that I don't vividly remember what happened between the moment I saw that lady floating towards me and my screaming. The best I can explain it is that I sort of blacked out for a moment before remembering screaming and having my parents rush into the room. My window was closed again, which would suggest to people that it was just a night terror. That's what my parents believed it was, I think. My mom started taking me to therapy for a while because they were worried about me. We lived in that house for 3 more years, and I never got used to it. My brother stopped talking about the White Lady, but I think it was because he was too scared, not because she stopped visiting. Sometimes I would hear him crying at night and saying, "Go away." I think he just also didn't want to be forced into going to therapy. Sometimes when it storms at night, I still get scared to even get up to go to the bathroom or get water. I'll glance over at corners of the room, making sure I don't see something tall lurking there. It goes to show how these kinds of things stick with you into adulthood. I'd be more open to believing it was simply night terrors if it weren't for the fact that I saw that hand on my window before my little brother even first mentioned the White Lady. I guess this is just one of those freakish experiences that cannot be explained. This happened in early December 2 years ago, when I drove up into the mountains to visit an old friend I had not seen in a long time. His fictional name for the story is Scott, and my real name is Jeremy. We had been friends since middle school, but after graduation, he moved out to a small mountain town with his family. Over the years, we slowly drifted apart. I stayed in New York City for work, and he stayed up in the mountains. We never fought or anything, we just stopped keeping up with each other's lives. So when he reached out to me out of nowhere and said I should come visit for a weekend, it made me feel kind of nostalgic and excited. He said it was the best time to come up because the snow added to the rustic rural vibe. I figured it would be fun to catch up. The drive up the mountain was extra long because I drove a bit slower due to icy conditions. There were barely any other cars on the road, and the sun went down around 4 p.m. since it was December, and by the time I reached the area where he was living, it was already pitch black. He lived in one of those older wooden houses on the side of the mountain. There were only a few scattered houses nearby, all spaced out far from each other. He lives in a good area for skiing. If only I could ski. When I pulled into his driveway and he came outside to greet me, the first thing I noticed was that something about him felt off, or just different. I hadn't seen him in years, so I figured maybe I just forgot what he looked like and acted like. But the way he talked was different, slower than he used to talk, and he kept pausing between sentences like he forgot what he was saying. He helped carry my bag inside, and the inside of the house was warm but pretty empty. Not much furniture except for a couch, a table, a couple chairs, and some antique-looking wall decor. He told me I could sleep on the couch for the weekend since it folded into a pull-out bed. I told him that was fine. The house had a long, dark hallway across from the couch that led to a bathroom and 2 empty guest rooms, which he explained were empty because this used to be his grandparents' house and they recently passed away. He told me he lived alone here now. The hallway had no light at the end and the doors were all open, so from the couch, all I could see was this pitch-black rectangle stretching into the back of the house. For some reason, it made me uncomfortable, even though there was nothing obviously scary about it. That first night, we talked a little bit about old times, but it felt strange. His general demeanor and mannerisms were more socially awkward now, but I chalked it up to the fact that living alone in the mountains for years could make anyone a bit weird. He barely made eye contact, and I did feel like he kept looking in the direction of the hallway. When it was time to sleep, he went upstairs to his bedroom, and I got the couch set up. I left a light near the hallway on because the dark made me nervous. I felt stupid about it, but the hallway really bothered me. I fell asleep, but at around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a thumping sound from upstairs. I quickly realized they were fast footsteps running across the floor above me. It sounded like someone sprinting from one end of the room to the other, then stopping and then sprinting again. The footsteps went on for about 20 seconds before just stopping completely. I waited to hear a door open or close or anything, but there was complete silence after that. I eventually fell back asleep, even though I was pretty creeped the fuck out after that. The second day was even weirder. Scott acted distracted the entire day, barely talking, barely eating, and whenever I asked if he was feeling okay, he would just nod without saying anything. I didn't understand why he was acting this way, being that he invited me here for the weekend for what I assumed was to catch up and rekindle our friendship. I also counted him going down that hallway at least 5 times throughout the day, and I never bothered to check what he was looking at. Since there was a bathroom at the end of the hall, I just presumed he was going in there, even though I never heard a flush. That night, the weather got worse, and a snowstorm rolled through. Wind slammed against the house hard enough to make the walls shake a little. It was awesome, honestly. I love the vibe of being snowed in a cozy place. I went to the couch and scrolled on my phone for like an hour, then went to sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up again. This time, I heard soft scraping sounds. They were coming from downstairs, somewhere in the hallway. It sounded like something dragging across the wooden floor. Then it just stopped. But then, there was a sudden tap on the wall behind me, like someone had flicked it with their finger. I turned and looked down the hallway. I didn't leave that light on that night, so it was completely dark. I didn't want to get up. I did my best to just roll to the other side and block the noises out. Old house, I kept telling myself. I did fall back asleep, and the next thing I remember is waking up in the morning. The third night was the worst. By this time, I felt uneasy in the house in general, and I kept catching Scott staring at me for too long without saying anything, like he was checking if I noticed something. I almost thought about leaving early, but the snowstorm was supposed to last until morning. After dinner, Scott went upstairs early and I stayed up on my phone, starting to question the point of this visit entirely. Eventually, I set up the couch and laid down. I shut my eyes and tried to sleep, but sometime around 2 in the morning again, I woke up without knowing why. My eyes opened, but the rest of my body refused to move. I had heard of sleep paralysis before, but I had never experienced it. It was like being awake inside a dead body. I could only move my eyes. I couldn't even move my fingers. I started to panic, but then something made it even worse. I noticed movement at the far end of the hallway. At first, it was so dark that I couldn't tell if it was real or not, but after a few seconds, I realized what I was seeing. Scott was standing at the very end of the hallway. I could only see his outline because his face was completely hidden in the darkness. His arms hung at his sides and he was standing perfectly still, like he'd been there for a long time just watching me. It was like a scene from Paranormal Activity. I tried to speak to him, but no sound came out. I tried to move or twitch or anything, but my body stayed frozen. I didn't even feel like I was breathing, to be honest. I could only stare. He stood there for what felt like an entire minute, not moving at all. Then, without warning, he slowly turned to his right and walked into the guest room at the end of the hall. He disappeared into the darkness without a sound. My body slowly started to regain control. First my fingers, then my arms, then my ability to sit up. Once I fully snapped out of it, I sat up shaking and sweating. I kept telling myself it might have just been a dream or a hallucination, since sleep paralysis can cause that, but something in my gut said it wasn't. I whispered his name to see if he would answer. Nothing. Against everything in me, I got up and forced myself to walk down the hallway toward the room he had gone into. When I stepped inside, the room looked empty, but in the far corner by the window, someone was standing. I could see the shape of a person facing the window looking outside. I couldn't tell if it was Scott. Either way, the sight was horrifying. I slowly backed out and then ran upstairs to his bedroom. I found Scott asleep in his bed, completely knocked out. I shook him awake and he looked confused and irritated, like he had no idea why I was waking him up. When I tried to tell him what I saw, he refused to go downstairs. I begged him to believe me that someone else was in the house. He would not even look toward the stairs. He didn't say anything, but his expression changed in a way that scared me even more. He looked like he already knew what I had seen. I then asked him firmly, "Scott, who is that downstairs?" And he just looked at me and shrugged his shoulders. At that point, I decided I was done. I didn't care about the snow or the time. I ran downstairs and grabbed my bag to pack my stuff. I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting to see that person standing there again. Genuinely, I just wanted to teleport out of that house immediately. When I got outside, the cold air almost relieved me. I brushed snow off my car and got inside as fast as possible. As I backed out of the driveway, I made the mistake of looking up at the house one last time. In that window of the room at the end of the hallway, I saw a silhouette. Surely that same person I saw standing in that room just before. That was the last thing I ever saw of Scott's house. After that weekend, he stopped responding to texts. I threatened to call in a wellness check when I got worried that he got murdered or something, and finally he responded saying, "I'm fine." That's it though. He didn't respond to any further texts, so I stopped bothering. That was not the same Scott I knew from school. Whatever happened to him, and whoever that was in his house, it's not my problem. I'd be lying if I said it doesn't terrify the shit out of me though.
This happened about 7 years ago, ironically on Halloween night. It was pretty late, close to midnight, so all the kids in the neighborhood had already gone home. Even our neighbors across the way had stopped playing their corny Halloween tape. You know, the ones with the creaking door sounds and witch cackling. It was just me and my cousin Q, sitting in the living room. Now, my other cousin, who was about 4 years old, had left her doll laying on the floor, face down. It was one of those Baby Alive dolls or something like that, the ones with the moving eyelids. Q had issues with that doll the moment it was bought. She hated it and said it was creepy. In fact, she often threw it down the basement stairs. I had no problems with it, and so it stayed on the floor so my little cousin could pick it up in the morning. It was very quiet for about half an hour, until I heard a loud, rasping shuffling noise that seemed to be coming from outside. It sounded like an older man right outside our window. I turned to Q, who looked back at me. "Did you hear that?" "It's probably the neighbor's tape again," she said. She went back to typing on her computer. It was silent for another minute before we heard the rasping noise again, louder this time. It sounded like the man was trying to say something. I got up from the couch and peeked out the window. Absolutely no one out there, not even in the street. Our neighbor's house was dark. It was as still as any night in our quiet neighborhood. "There's no one out there," I said, looking back to Q. She didn't say anything. I was kind of getting freaked out. Another minute passed, and this time there was whispering, but loud whispering. I remember it sounded like a kid and a woman. Q finally looked up from her computer. "It's that doll," she said. Of course she thought it was. She was very superstitious. I gave her a skeptic look. Let me say this. I don't believe in the paranormal. I leant down and picked up the doll. It was fine. Her eyes were closed. I forgot to say that it had a voice box thing in it, but it didn't have any batteries. I put it back down. "No, it's not. Just leave it alone," I told her. It was silent again. I went back to my seat on the couch. The rasping started again, and I heard the man say something garbled, followed by wheezing. I jumped up from the couch. I was going to see if it was coming from the backyard. Just as I started walking, I noticed that the doll had moved a little. I picked it up again and turned it over. Its eyes were open, and it was heavier than before. I dropped it, and Q threw it down the basement again. I still have no idea what to think. Q denies it ever happened, and my little cousin never asked about her doll after that. I saw the doll only one time after that, on the top basement step laying on its side. This time, I pushed it down the steps. I was up late reading on a cold night. My bedroom is on the first floor, and I live alone in a relatively quiet and wooded area. For that reason, a lot of my windows didn't have any blinds, since it wasn't as if people driving by were able to look into my house. Plus, I like waking up to the sunlight shining in my bedroom. But this one night made me regret never getting blinds in the bedroom. After finally shutting my reading lamp to get some shut-eye, I had a good 2 minutes of silence before I heard the sound of something hitting the window. It sounded like a single tap from a person's fist. I was facing away from the window and didn't want to turn around. I was used to hearing things like tree branches brush up against the walls and windows, but I distinctly recognized the sound to be a fist hitting glass. The thought that somebody might be outside my window watching me frightened me. The fact that somebody would walk all the way onto my property to my bedroom window. I tried to accept that maybe it was just a tree branch, but a second and single knock at the window confirms my fear. It was a fist hitting the glass, and somebody was outside my window. I figured that if I just ignored it, they would go away. Maybe it was just some punk trying to mess with me. If they thought I was sleeping, they would get bored. Another knock at the window came, and I desperately tried to just stay still and show no reactions. But when the fourth knock came routinely, I decided enough was enough. I should confront this jerk like a real man. I turned to the window, and just barely caught a glimpse of a black shadow quickly moving under the window. For some reason, actually seeing something at the window killed any courage I had, and I ran to the kitchen phone and called the police. They said they would have an officer over in 10 minutes. When I hung up, I saw something in the corner of my eye. I turned my head and saw somebody standing outside my kitchen window, surely looking at me. Only for a second though, because as soon as I noticed, he took off. Somebody was watching me through all the windows. Then I received a disturbing phone call. It was my neighbor, who also happens to be my best friend. He happened to notice through his window that 3 people dressed in black walked onto my property earlier, one of them with a sharp, shiny object in his hand. This only made me panic even more. I ran upstairs where I knew I couldn't be watched and hid in the bathroom. I heard constant single knocks at the front door downstairs. No way it was the police. I just prayed they would get there in time, and thankfully, moments after the knocking stopped, I heard heavy banging at the front door, followed by someone screaming police. It turned out to be the cops, but whoever the 3 men were already gone into the woods. It might have been more than 3, I don't even know. All I know is they were never caught, and that I went out to get blinds the same week. My parents are divorced, and I was living with my dad. I'm an only child, so the only time I was around kids my own age was when I was out making friends with kids on the block. There was this one kid that lived on the corner of my block. His name was Tom. I met him while riding my bike. He strangely invited me over to shoot some hoops with him, so I did. He was a lot older than me. I was 12 and he was 16. I found out after hanging out with him a lot that he was an only child as well, and that he also lived with his dad. At first, I found him very relatable. I gave him my phone number and he would call to hang out. Sometimes he would come over and play video games. But then he started getting weird. He would call non-stop. If I didn't answer, he would begin to leave annoyed messages. He would call 5 or 6 times before coming over and ringing the bell. If my dad wasn't home, I usually didn't answer it, but when he was home, he would force me to hang out with Tom, even though I told him he was creepy. I biked with Tom back down to his house while pretending to listen to him babble on about stupid shit. This kid would never shut up. I needed to find a way to get him to stop looking for me. Then, for the first time, he invited me into his house. I really didn't want to go in, but it didn't seem I had a choice. The second I walked into the door, the foul, disgusting odor of his house filled my lungs. Clothes were tossed all over the floor, broken glass in one corner of the room, and what looked like coffee stains on the wall. It was the most disgusting place I'd ever seen. And then, a huge, shady-looking man walked out from another room. He looked at me with a very intimidating look. I felt myself backing up away from him, until Tom introduced him as his father. The man just gave me a big grunt and stomped off into another room. It was official, this kid was a fucking creep. I needed to get away from him for good. I decided I didn't even want to be in that house anymore, and just made up some excuse to go. I think that I said that I forgot I had a doctor's appointment, and at that moment, his smile slowly faded as an unhappy, if not extremely angry expression crossed his face. He didn't even give me any response. He just looked at me with this unnerving stare. I left in a hurry and ran back down the block to my house. The door was locked, surprisingly. I unlocked it with the key my dad made me carry and found that he wasn't home. I really wanted him to be home. and then I found a little sticky note on the fridge saying he was called into work for a possible storm emergency. So that night before going to sleep, I checked my email for a response from somebody on eBay, but instead I had about 5 new emails all titled in capital letters, and they were all sent from an email named tomtom20@aol.com. It was him. I never gave him my email and still have no idea how he got it. One of the emails was titled, "You made a mistake." Another was titled, "I know where you live," and the rest were filled with profanity and threats. I was only 12 and was extremely intimidated by this, so I was ready to call my dad, but as soon as I was heading to the kitchen phone, I heard the sound of rustling bushes outside. I opened the blinds of the window that was facing the bushes, and was greeted by the face of a huge man who I instantly recognized as Tom's dad. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was already gone. When my dad came home early because of this situation, we went on to get a restraining order as soon as possible. Tom and his dad moved out about a month after that. I moved into a house that my aunt and uncle had been renting out for several years after they built a new place. I spent a few months alone before a buddy from work asked if I was looking for a roommate. I thought about it for a few days and ended up allowing him to move in. It was a 2-bedroom place with a den and office in the garage. He decided he wanted his own space, as the bedrooms were right next to each other, so he moved his stuff into the office in the garage. And I have to admit, it was a pretty cool setup he had. The only problem, he didn't have a bathroom or kitchen out there, so he would use the kitchen and toilet in the house. We worked different schedules, so I would often leave the house unlocked for him. One night, I went to my girlfriend's house for dinner. After I got back, I decided to grab a 6-pack of beer I had bought the previous night. When I opened the fridge, my beer was gone. I assumed it was my roommate and went into a blind rage. I stormed out into the garage and slammed his bedroom door open. He was sleeping and rolled over. I screamed at him, asking why he drank my beer without asking. He said he didn't touch my beer and rubbed the sleep out of his eyes. Having lived with him for a while, I was pretty good at judging when he was lying. I felt he was telling the truth. My heart sank as I came to the realization that somebody had stolen our beer from the fridge and whatever else. We went back into the house and made sure everything was in its place. The TV was there, all the furniture. It wasn't until I went into my bedroom and realized my $2,000 laptop was gone that we began to panic. My buddy called the cops and we searched high and low for the beer and laptop, thinking I might have misplaced them. We soon gave up and began to search the yard for whoever had done this. We didn't live alone in this house though. There was a room that had been built on several years after the house was built. My aunt's dying mother spent her last couple of years living there, as it was easy for my aunt and uncle to care for her during her sickness. When she died, they began to rent the room out to a strange woman, before eventually moving out themselves and renting the rest of the house out. The woman remained there until we moved in, and my aunt and uncle had their concerns with her. They believed she was a drug addict, which became evident to us during our stay there. She behaved erratically, and we would hear strange noises from her end of the house all hours of the night. Her brother moved in several months after we did, which was strange because her place was a 1-bedroom suite. We figured he just slept on the couch or something. He was even weirder than her, though. He wouldn't acknowledge me when I pulled up into the driveway while he was sitting having a smoke. Trying to make conversation with the guy was pointless. He basically just stared through your soul. One night he even asked my roommate if he could score him drugs. That night during our search for the burglar, we went out to the garage door, only to find bare footprints in the snow. The footprints led from their suite door to our garage door. We put 2 and 2 together and began banging on their door. We said we knew it was him, and he better answer the door. Someone inside lifted the curtain and made eye contact with me, which to this day still gives me chills. The cops showed up and took down all our information. They scoured the house and found nothing, and no one. We showed them the footprints and explained that the people living in the suite were drug addicts. We gave the officers their names. They ran their names in their cruiser and came back to inform us that the man had a warrant in another province and was convicted of breaking and entering several years back. The cops knocked on their door for several minutes and identified themselves as police officers to no avail. They informed us that because the warrant was from out of province, and technically the man hadn't committed a crime, there was nothing they could do about it. The cops left and it was 1 a.m., so my roommate and I went to bed. The door that connects the 2 weirdos' suite and my part of the house can only be locked from their side of the door. I completely forgot about this before falling asleep. During the night, I heard footsteps outside my door and a few loud bangs. My doorknob began to shake violently. I was barely awake and brushed it off as my roommate. Luckily, I always lock my bedroom door at night. The next morning, I asked my roommate what was so important at 3 a.m. that he would need to try and get in my room. He told me he slept through the night and hadn't even got up to go to the bathroom. My heart sank. I told him what had happened during the night. I have never been more glad that I locked my door at night, due to some silly childhood fear that I've held onto into adulthood. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I left my bedroom door open and that man got into my room. Needless to say, me and my buddy moved out of that place a few weeks later. It happened on my friend's 21st birthday. We were throwing him a big party filled with alcohol. There were a lot of people I didn't know there. It was just chaotic in the house. There were probably 100 people. But even in all the chaos, I noticed one shady character that stood out. There was an older man sitting in the corner of the room, just kind of watching everybody drinking and dancing. I didn't think much about it at first, assuming it was someone's dad or uncle or something, but as the night died down and more than half of the guests had already left, the man was still there by himself in the corner. At that point, I asked one of my friends who that guy was, and he said he had no idea. We decided to wait until most of the guests had left, figuring maybe he would too. And when the last of the guests were gone, we went back into the living room, and surely enough, he was gone. I felt relieved immediately, even though it wasn't even my house. That man just seemed so out of place, and it was downright creepy. Me and a couple of other friends slept over that night. I slept on the couch in the den. Falling asleep was easy with all the alcohol running through my veins, but staying asleep was a problem. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling insanely thirsty and having to go to the bathroom. I first went to the bathroom since it was closer, and then went up to the kitchen and got a glass of water. When I went back down to the den and laid back down on the couch, I noticed that the sliding door to the coat closet across from the couch had been slightly slit open. It was too dark to see anything else though, like anything inside of it. I felt a chill run down my spine as I remembered the creepy man sitting in the corner. The idea of that man hiding in the closet immediately popped into mind. I continued to lay still, under the assumption that he was watching me through the open door of the closet. I began to plan my escape. I could jump over the other couch and land right next to the stairway upstairs to the living room, but I just had to gather up the courage to do it. Then I saw the closet door slide open a little more, and that's when I got the courage to run for it. I jumped over the couch and ran up the stairs. I could hear the closet door fully slide open and somebody running after me. I screamed at my friends who were on the couches to wake up. All three of my friends that were in the living room woke up and looked at me as if I were crazy. I knew that we now outnumbered him 4-1, so I looked at the stairs and waited, but he never came up. My friends demanded an explanation, so I told them that the creepy man from earlier was hiding in the coat closet, and he almost chased me up the stairs. Just then, we heard the back door from down in the den open up, and we all looked at each other. We called the cops, but the man was never found. He simply left through the back door. When I was going to college in North Carolina, I started working at a local TJ Maxx store for some extra cash. Since I was in class during the day, I usually worked the later shifts. One night I was walking to my car. I think it was about 11 or 11:30. As a safety protocol, all of the employees left together, and the security guard would watch from the sidewalk to make sure we all got to our cars all right. I was approaching my car when I heard a car pull up behind me. I turned around and there was a woman with her teenage daughter in the passenger seat. She rolled the window down and started giving me a story about how they just came into town to visit family and that they're out of gas and have no money, and then asked if they could borrow a few dollars. I told them the truth, which was that I had no cash on me. I never carry cash. So she just looked at me and asked very hurriedly if I would get into the car with them, go to the gas station, and buy them about $10 worth of gas. I mean, obviously I said no, and she asked a few more times. It wasn't until I had said no that I noticed the daughter in the passenger seat had been staring at me the whole time, and she was licking her lips and wringing her fingers. At that point, I bolted back to the store where the security guard was, because they had pulled up behind my car, so I would have been stuck there. I told him what had happened. He started walking to their car, and they sped away. Working the night shift always sucked. I work in an office building and would constantly do the night shifts since it was the only time it would work out for me. I was just about always the only person on the floor I worked on, possibly in the whole building. There would always be a kind of eerie feeling to being in such a big building with most of the lights out and absolutely no one around. But on the upside, it was peaceful and less stressful, and I was able to get a lot of work done. There was this one night though. It was a Friday night, around 2 in the morning. I was typing away on my keyboard when I heard a noise from outside my cubicle. It sounded like just a random crack from the walls or something. It's unusual in this building, but I didn't get too concerned about it. I resumed typing away and was once again interrupted by a sound. This time, the sound of a computer starting up. It caught me off guard. I was sure nobody else was working the night shift. I stood up on my chair to get a view over the cubicle walls. The glare of a computer screen in the dark was visible in a cubicle on the opposite side of the room. Then I did something stupid, something I regret. I asked if there was anybody there in a yell, hoping to get an answer from a fellow employee. But instead, I saw the glaring light of the computer monitor across the room turn off, and there was once again nothing but darkness on that side of the room. I started getting nervous. I turned off the lamp and computer screen so that I wouldn't give away my position to whoever that was. I crouched down and tiptoed out across to a nearby cubicle. There was just utter silence. I sat waiting for something to happen for God knows how long, but I eventually decided the coast was clear. I tiptoed down past all the cubicles until I reached the opening near the exit door to the stairs and elevators, and that's when I realized that my fearful suspicion was true. There was a man crouched down behind a plant in the corner of the room, dressed in all black. I felt my heart sink as I noticed him, but it didn't seem like he knew that I noticed him. I turned back to the stairway door. There was no way I was going to wait for the elevator and take a chance. I casually opened the door and closed it behind me, proceeding to walk down the stairs. After making it down about 2 flights of stairs, I heard the door above me push open aggressively, followed by manic echoing footsteps coming fast down the stairs. I raced down the stairs, running as fast as I could, all while the footsteps above me were getting louder. I finally made it to the first floor, raced through the lobby, and out the front door. Whoever was in there didn't follow me. I immediately called the cops, along with one of my bosses. My boss said no one was scheduled to work except for me. The cops scanned the place from top to bottom. There was no one in there. I couldn't help them out with any description other than he was wearing all black. I did continue to do the night shift for about a week after that, with my boss allowing me to lock all possible entrances to the floor, including the elevators. But I still wasn't comfortable with it, so ever since, I've been doing the day shifts. It was 4 a.m. on a Saturday night. I woke up to my stomach rumbling, and nothing is worse than trying to sleep on an empty stomach. So I got out of bed and made my way to the kitchen to make a sandwich. But immediately I noticed that the cabinet was open. I'm always super obsessive over closing everything I open, so I couldn't believe that I had done that. I found it more odd than most people would. That's just how I am. Most people would shut the cabinet and forget about it, but I went as far as investigating around the house for any unwanted guests. There was nobody in any of the closets I checked, but when I went down to the den, the back door was wide open. I was certain now that someone had been in my house. I somehow had the balls to step outside and turn on the patio light, and there was somebody sitting in one of the patio chairs. He looked at me with a blank expression and got up slowly. He looked filthy, almost homeless. His hair was down to his shoulders. He started walking closer to me. I couldn't tell what his intentions were, and I kinda just stood there, almost taking him as harmless. But he suddenly lunged at me, and I barely had time to shut the door and lock it. We stared each other down for 10 seconds through the glass, until I finally realized I should be taking that time to call the cops. I ran to the kitchen to get the phone, and as I was dialing, I noticed when I got back that he was already gone. I still called the cops, but nothing was ever found of the man. This is a very weird story that took place a few months ago. I still live in the same house this happened in. I have an electrical outlet under my bed that I use to charge my phone with. I leave my phone up on the ledge above my bed every night, usually using it as an alarm. However, something strange started happening on a Monday night in February. I woke up to my alarm clock blasting. Only it was still dark out. I looked at my actual alarm clock sitting on my desk. It was 4 in the morning. I wasn't sure if I'd accidentally set a new alarm. The alarm was titled Down. I unset it and went back to sleep, not overthinking it. The next night, I woke up again to the sound of my phone's alarm clock blasting. I saw that the time was 3 in the morning, and the alarm clock title was set to Beneath. No way had I set that alarm. I would remember something like that. I figured my brother was playing a joke on me somehow. The next morning, I told my dad to tell him to stop messing with my alarm clock, that it's interrupting my actual sleep on school nights. But he swore on his life that he had never touched it, and I kinda believed him. That night, I put a password on my phone and wrote it on a sticky note just for safekeeping. I hid the sticky note on the wall behind my bed and made sure no extra alarms were set. The only one was set for 8 a.m. I fell asleep, but once again, I woke up to the blasting alarm clock in total darkness. 2 a.m. The alarm was titled The. I was a little freaked out now. Something was really wrong with my phone. I was sure someone was hacking into it. The next day I left it off for the whole day in hopes that whoever was messing with it would forget about it. And that night I used my actual alarm clock on my desk as an alarm instead. I set it to 8 a.m. and went to sleep. But when I woke up, there was once again no sunlight. My alarm clock was off, so I couldn't see the time. It was my phone. It had been moved to the ledge. But the alarm clock sound wasn't the usual marimba. It was some kind of distorted screaming sound. I turned off the alarm, which was titled Bed. It was 1 in the morning. I was laying there clueless, not knowing what to think. My phone was at 10%, so I reached down under my bed to try and find the charger that's normally plugged into the wall. It was missing. And then, at the worst possible time, I realized exactly what it all meant. The 4 alarm titles formed a sentence: Down beneath the bed. I tried to pull my arm away, but it was too late. I felt a hand grab my arm and squeeze tight. I screamed as loud as I could, loud enough for all the neighbors to hear. I heard my parents' bedroom door open and footsteps running over to my room. My door opened and my dad barged in with a baseball bat. He saw that I was being pulled down to the edge of my bed. My dad reached under my bed and grabbed a hold of the man hiding under. He knocked him out with the bat and called the cops. The man clearly didn't plan that out, as he basically trapped himself under my bed. Police told us that he was a registered sex offender who had been arrested 10 times. He's extremely messed up in the head, and clearly gains pleasure from messing with and scaring his victims. It scares me the most that he was in our house, and under my bed, for 4 days. The most horrifying experience that ever happened to me didn't even directly happen to me. I have a friend that I'll call Ty. We would hang out or at least text every day, but there was this one day that he didn't respond to any of my texts or calls. I went over to his house, which was a block away, to see if he was alright. I knocked and rang, but he didn't answer, which was weird because his car was there. I got the feeling he wanted to be left alone, but late that night, I got a FaceTime request from an unknown number. I cautiously answered it with the camera aimed away from my face. A face popped up on the screen, and it was Ty. I felt so relieved and showed my face. When I got a little better look at his face, I noticed he looked different, like a lot more tired and, I don't know, paranoid, I guess. And he was also in an unfamiliar room. I asked him where he was and why he wasn't answering, to which he responded that he was fine and he was at home. I asked him whose phone he was using, and he just took a long pause before answering. He just blankly stared at the camera until finally answering that he was using his uncle's phone. That was really weird, but before I could question him further, he all of a sudden demands that I lend him $10,000 and that he'll pay me back. I can't help but laugh at this until I see that he's serious. More than just serious. His facial expression filled with what looked like worry. I asked him why the hell he needed so much money, and there was once again a huge pause, with him just staring into the camera. He finally says he has to go, and with that, the call ended. It was probably one of the weirdest and most unnerving experiences of my life. I had never seen him act so weird. Something was clearly wrong with him. But it was late, and I figured I would just go over to his house tomorrow and talk with him. The next day, first thing in the morning, I went straight over to his house and rang the doorbell about 10 times. He didn't answer. I eventually gave it up as a lost cause. If he wanted to act sketchy, that was his problem. But late that night, around the same time, I received another FaceTime call from another unknown number. I answered it, and it was again Ty. But this time, he looked like shit. His hair was a mess. He had a cut on his forehead. He had bags under his eyes. I didn't understand what the hell was wrong with him. He wouldn't tell me anything. He just kept demanding $10,000 to be paid to some random address, to which I kept telling him no. And then he said something that still haunts me. He said in a shaky, nervous voice, "Come on, don't point a gun at my back." It hit me like a bullet as he said this, accompanied with an ever so slightly twitch of his left eye, to which I interpreted as a wink. But then, the call ended abruptly, and I can only imagine what was going to happen to him. By some miracle, I remembered the address and sent the cops there right away. It was an old abandoned house on a basically deserted block miles away from my house. They found Ty in the basement, beaten senseless and barely alive, but they got to him just in time. The sicko that did this to him was already long gone. Ty doesn't like to talk about it, but the most he told me was that he was walking home before everything went black, and he woke up in a dark basement.